Special Operations, Covert Ops, Espionage, The Team House, with your hosts, Jack Murphy and David Park.
Hey folks, welcome to episode 292 of The Team House. I'm Jack, here with Dave, and our guest on tonight's show is Ed Bogan, career CIA officer. Spent significant amounts of time in Central Asia and South Asia and Ukraine as well. So we're really excited to talk to him about his extensive career here in a moment. I just want to take a moment before we get started to remind you that you can find a link to our Patreon down in the description, and subscribe for $5 a month, and you get access to all these episodes ad-free, as well as access to our sister podcast, Liaison. Please go and check it out. We really appreciate all of you guys who support the channel, and that really helps keep the lights on around here. And the second thing I want to tell you about is I have a book coming out in December, We Defy: The Lost Chapters of Special Forces History. This book covers the things that aren't covered in the other books. So America's first counterterrorism unit, Blue Light, is in here. Detachment A, the guys who were undercover in Berlin, Green Berets who were undercover in Berlin with a sabotage mission. Green Light, the dudes that jumped in or trained to jump in backpack nuclear weapons behind enemy lines during the Cold War. I mean, a lot of these very interesting things, and I probably did close to 100 interviews for this thing, talking to the people who are directly involved. So I'm really excited. I get excited talking about this stuff. I can go on and on. But it's available for pre-order on Amazon right now, and the paperback as well as the ebook will be out on December 9th. So thank you guys for checking it out. So Ed, welcome to the show.
Thank you. Thank you so much. I'm really happy to be here. It's a great honor.
So, you know, you've seen the show before, so you know the deal. I'm going to ask you about your origin story. Tell us about kind of like what your upbringing was and how that took you towards Central Intelligence.
Absolutely. You know, I grew up in New Jersey, at the Jersey Shore, actually, in a fishing community. My family was into fishing, mostly party boats, if you know what they are.
Where in Jersey Shore?
Point Pleasant Beach.
Okay. I was dragged to Long Beach Island every summer as a kid.
Yeah, just a little bit north of Long Beach Island, you know. Yeah, because you were just north of or south of Seaside.
Yeah.
Yeah, so that's where after, you know, I came of age to go to bars. You know, Seaside was the place to go, and I was there in the '90s, early '90s, and it definitely didn't change when the 2000s came and the Jersey Shore TV show was on. It's pretty much the same. But anyway, yeah, so I grew up in a fishing community in Point Pleasant Beach, New Jersey. Family that was multiple generations of fishermen. I obviously didn't do that. I worked on the boats, got mildly seasick. I couldn't shake it. Tried my best, but such is life. But after sort of finishing high school, I wasn't really sure what I wanted to do. I was trying to actually become a professional skateboarder for a few years. I had some sponsorships and was traveling around mostly just the East Coast, competing. And you know, I wasn't as good as I probably thought I was at the time, but competed for a while and had a couple of major injuries, which led me to say, okay, time to buckle down and get a degree. But at the same time, I really wasn't sure what I wanted to do. So I started out with a community college in Ocean County, New Jersey, taking courses there that were, you know, basically intro to this, intro to that, or, you know, psychology 2, you know, after intro to psych, things like that. And I kind of started with interest in law enforcement and criminal justice courses. And I started looking at the sort of psychological underpinnings behind a lot of the theory. So I said, all right, let me start studying psychology. And then as I was studying the psychology courses, I was like, well, what's behind that? And I said, this philosophy stuff seems pretty interesting. And I started studying more philosophy courses. So that kind of set the hook in me. And I said, all right, I want to continue studying philosophy. So I started looking for, basically a 4-year university to transfer those credits to. And I moved to Philadelphia. And in 1992, 1992, and enrolled at LaSalle University because I went to while it's sort of a Christian university, there's a lot of philosophy programs around the Philadelphia area, and I thought theirs was the most diverse and kind of vast. I mean, they had a rather large department, so I selected them because I wasn't going because of the religious background. It was more just to get the breadth of study. So I studied there for 2 years to get my bachelor's degree. And because I had done so many intro to this, intro to that classes, it was almost all philosophy courses the entire time. So I was kind of getting really focused in on that. And there's really nothing you can do with a bachelor's degree in philosophy. So I kind of wish I could go back and dual major and maybe pick like accounting to go with it or something.
But being a philosophy major, doesn't it help you out like later on in your life, that it helps you with your decision-making process?
Definitely, but I think it might make you probably your writing is
Not
probably
employable.
Yeah, still not employable.
Yeah.
Your writing's still a little too verbose and probably a little annoyingly arrogant too. So after I finished that, I actually enrolled at Villanova in their graduate program, philosophy program. They had a specialty in what's called contemporary continental philosophy, which is, European thinkers of the last 150 years. Think like Friedrich Nietzsche forward.
Mm-hmm.
And it's super interesting, probably my favorite area of thought to sort of dig into. And I actually applied to the program, didn't get in, and then I had to I went back and I was like, why? Like, can't I just take courses here and pay for it? And so I didn't get in their formal program, but they allowed me to take courses there. So I only did that one semester, and it was just too much to juggle with what I was doing. I was working. I started working within the mayor's office in Philadelphia, not the political office, but the broader mayor's office of community services, where I was doing a range of classes. I was teaching, whether it was a leadership program for, gifted inner city kids, or there was a literacy program and GED prep course for illiterate adults, a lot of substance abusers who are, trying to get a second chance. And so I was doing that for a couple of years. And the commute out to Villanova from Center City really wasn't working for me. So I only lasted a semester, and I wanted to just sort of reset a path forward. So I worked for those 2 years. And one thing I saw throughout the mayor's office was people with law degrees and not necessarily lawyers, like a load of people doing a load of different things, but they had a law degree that I guess opened the door for them. So I said, okay, I think that might be the right path for me. So I applied to several law schools in the Philadelphia area and got into Temple. Temple Law School I was very excited about because they had a robust international law program, and I had, a long-standing interest in traveling abroad and seeing the world. So I was really excited when I got accepted there. So I started with Temple, and my first summer, so you have 3 years of law school. My first summer, I went to a study abroad program at the University of Athens School of Law that was affiliated with Temple, and just a whole range of international law courses across, war crimes and constitutions in general, IP, you name it. And it was a great summer. It was a real broadening experience for me in so many ways. There was like a 4-day break in the middle of this summer program, and I went with several classmates. We flew over to Cairo and saw all the ancient sites. And for me, when I was little, I was always intrigued by ancient Egypt and ancient Greece and their culture and the gods and all that whatnot. So just to be in those two places was really I would say had a huge impact on me, and saying, I definitely want to have some kind of ability to spend my life traveling in some manner. When the program ended, I still had several weeks before the new semester started. So I ended up backpacking across Europe for about 2 weeks, and then linked up with my father at the time in Wexford, Ireland. And we kind of did a cruise around Ireland for a week and a half or so. So I ended up basically making my way from Athens to Belfast in about 3 weeks and just zigged and zagged. And I had somewhat of a plan, but I changed it a lot along the way. Often you'd meet somebody interesting and they say, hey, we're going to, this town, we're going to Amsterdam, we're going to Paris, tag along with them, and just why not? So again, a really interesting experience for me, like unstructured, super fun, but at the same time, advancing my education and getting an international experience all at the same time. So while I was in my second year of law school, I applied for an internship with the State Department and was selected. And it's like a 10-week program in the summer. So it would have been for my second summer in law school. And they said, you were in Athens last year. We could send you to Athens and you can work in the embassy there for 10 weeks. I was like, this is incredible, because I had made a bunch of friends, a ton of Greek friends. So I was like, all right, now I get a chance to go back. And I had such a wonderful experience. Like you think you're going to sort of relive all those moments. So I said yes, and I went to work there. Fantastic experience. I was in the economic section, and there's maybe 4 of us there. So I actually had some accounts that I was responsible for, just sort of reporting things, and just a great experience. And the embassy there is pretty large, so it's a robust sort of interagency, government agency community there. So I was able to see quite a bit and meet a lot of different people from different government agencies and put more context onto sort of like what the different agencies are and do. I had a sense on who the station people were, and I had a few conversations. And of course, they didn't share anything, secret with me, but they inspire or intrigue. Let's say they intrigued me, and I said, okay, this looks really interesting. I wonder who this person is, what they're really up to. So while I was there, a lot of the state traffic, the cable traffic and state channels, for whatever reason, Athens was on a lot of the traffic about bin Laden. So there was a whole bunch of dialogue going on about bin Laden in state levels. And it was sort of about discussions with the Saudis. What are we going to do? That kind of stuff. And this was summer of 1998. So if in early August,
MI6 guy gets assassinated.
Say again?
There's an MI6 guy got assassinated in 1999?
Yep. And well, this was so this summer of 98, we have the embassy bombings in Africa. So I'm in this internship, and we're in the same time zone. And so there's, frantic cables moving around. There's tons of people I'm working with who know people who are posted in these locations right now. So there was just a lot of energy and anxiety and whatnot. And it just sort of, it kind of had a huge impact on me. And I said, no, who is this bin Laden? Who is this person who declared war on the United States in 1997? And how can I do something about it? So that really had an impact on me as far as where I wanted to go. Because, working in state, it was interesting, but it was not, it was fine, but that's not something I had no passion towards it and anything I wanted to do like that. So it was a wonderful experience for me, great exposure. But I think the better part of that summer was really seeing other agencies and getting a sense of, hey, I want to work for the agency. I want to work for the CIA. So I came back for my third year of law school, and, the tyranny of the day takes over. You're doing classes, you're doing all your things, and you're starting to think about, applying for jobs. And this is 1999. So you're, typing up your resume and you're mailing it out and handwritten letters and all the things. And then I don't remember exactly when it was during my third year. It was somewhere in the second half, but I saw an advertisement for the agency in like The Economist. And so I said, all right, time to do this. So I started the process. The process, as you know, takes a long time. It can take a year, it can take a year and a half, it can take 2 years in some instances. I think mine was probably like a year and several months. But while it was going on, I finished law school. I think I had sent out several hundred resumes, and I got all of two offers, and one of which was an offer that I think every law student got. So it wasn't, to me, it wasn't really an offer. It was some sort of sales job with American Express. But the job I did get offered was a clerkship in the Mercer County, New Jersey courthouse. Great job. Clerkships are fantastic. You're just piled on with work, and the sort of survey you get of, sort of all things legal is pretty dramatic. In my instance, it was a civil court judge. So it was any number of things from car accidents to, someone suing someone else in a business sense because someone slipped in their some ice that wasn't removed from their parking lot of their business, to toxic torts. Now, toxic torts is like this dump from the 70s that caused all kinds of cancer. Is now
a lot of
there's
those
insurance
in New Jersey.
companies. Right. And my judge was the state's expert in this issue. So we had all these cases. Now, this is 99. We had cases that went back to the 70s. And there's just insurance companies suing insurance companies, suing, companies that insure the insurers. I mean, everybody was trying to take a piece out of each other for these massive claims. And again, I would get every other Thursday was the basically motion day. And so you've got all in the intervening 2 weeks, you have all these motions filed by either side in a dispute. And they just come with reams and reams of material. And I have to prepare, boil it all down to its, bare arguments, pull the relevant case law, and present it to the judge with a recommendation. And just incredible work, 80-hour weeks easily. So, but in the meantime, in addition to that, I actually stayed for a 4th year at Temple Law and got an LLM in tax law, taxation. I was interested in tax law a little bit when I was working on the JD. It was, pretty interesting classes, particularly like the international aspects of it. And I thought maybe that could be a niche for me to get, a job overseas, as being an international tax law specialist. Anyway, because I chose Temple, some of the credits that went to my JD were able to attach to the LLM. So I was able to do basically 2 classes per semester at night while I was working. And by the end of that year, I had an LLM, which was great. So really happy I did that. Never used it, of course. But again, like, education is more than just using the degree for jobs and things.
And what do you mind if I ask you, like, what does a clerk do for a judge? I mean, do you do a lot of the research and give them briefings, or how does that work?
Yeah, so all judges have them. You'll hear like, hey, this person clerked for, Justice Rehnquist in the Supreme Court, and now they're the senator from whatever. Yeah, that's a certain thing. Like, when you're clerking at that level, that's really prestigious and whatnot. But there's courts everywhere. There's all different types of courts. So, for example, in the Mercer County Courthouse, you have civil courts, you have criminal courts, and you have family courts. And all the judges have clerks. And the clerk is really an assistant. It's an apprentice lawyer who is going to get crammed with unbelievable amounts of work to advance their understanding and support the judge. This is like some people will say, like, well, doing a clerkship is like 3 years at a law firm. It accelerates your learning considerably because of the breadth and depth of what you're probably covering. So it's like an apprenticeship, but it's an informed apprenticeship because you have the degree, you don't have the experience.
Mm-hmm. Interesting.
Yeah, fantastic thing. And I didn't go to law school to be a lawyer. I wasn't dead set against it, but that wasn't my preference. But while I was in the clerkship and going through the background investigation at the same time, I can't assume I'm going to get the job at the agency. So I continued to look for other positions. And to be quite frank, the clerkship opened doors. It opened doors to big New Jersey law firms, and there were some opportunities there. And interestingly, I get the phone call. So there's a couple things all came together at once. One, my judge was retiring, so she actually didn't finish her whole year. So, like, theoretically, I would have gone through till end of August to do a 1-year clerkship. This was probably like May. She was planning on retiring, something like that. Second, I get a phone call and get the offer from the agency. This is also like May timeframe. And I was ecstatic. And it just that alone like worked perfectly. So I was so happy that I could just because I would start in June in CIA. And then I get a phone call the next day from the state Supreme Court of New Jersey offering me a clerkship on the state Supreme Court, which would have been a real nice, so like a second year as a clerkship, which isn't typical. It's just an opportunity, but it's a hell of an opportunity to be on the state Supreme Court. So the things you would see there would be pretty remarkable, and would have been a great leg up into if I wanted to have a legal career. Anyway, said yes to the agency, and in June of 2000, I moved to Washington, D.C. So that's kind of how I got there and why. A lot of different things. You look at my chapters. It starts with kind of skateboarding, a little bit of a counterculture mindset. And in the agency, there's a little perception of it that's a little outside the box in certain ways. So like I saw sort of a corollary in that, but also with my sort of philosophy and legal background. So a lot of sort of big thought and strategy and writing. And I was just sort of thinking like all this stuff's going to come together and be kind of useful for me in terms of beginning my career and having at least a little bit of a tool set before I even find out what the hell I'm actually going to do.
And so you go to, you begin your training at CIA at the farm, 2000, graduate in 2001, like right as 9/11 is about to happen, right?
Correct. I finished training in June of 2001, and I was selected by our then Africa division. And I was prepared. So they basically said, you're going to go to the Congo. And super interesting place, a lot of history there, a lot of CIA history there. So pretty exciting. And they said, once the fall comes around, you'll start French, do a year of French before you go. So in the summertime, I, worked on one of the desks as a desk officer, supporting field requests for all kinds of things, traces, whatever. And, started to learn the work, at least just sort of the cadence of the work, the format of the work, the processes related to the work, all the support aspects of it. And then I began French. And lo and behold, my second day of French was 9/11. So that changed everything, as you can imagine. I remember being in class, remember being in French class, and the instructor's doing her thing, and another instructor comes in and says, you need to see, this was in the middle of the class, you need to see what's happening right now. And the instructor in the room is like, well, we're gonna take a break in about 10 minutes. And she's like, no, you need to stop right now and come out. So it was like a very abrupt, strange thing. And as we came out, TVs were on in sort of the hallway. And then I think it wasn't long after that the first tower fell. So you're just watching this, like, just completely dumbfounded. We get word that, and all the language classes are pouring into the hallway now. And a lot of my classmates, people I went through training, are there because they're in various languages. And we hear that the Pentagon was hit. And one of my friends lived in an apartment building as close to the Pentagon as possible as far as apartment buildings go. And he's like, I got to help. And I just went out with him. He jumped in his car, I jumped in mine, and we just raced that direction. But of course, we got to some point, I don't know, a couple, 2 miles out, and you're not getting any closer. Everything's
Right.
chaotic. All the traffic is what it is. And we both ended up making our way to another classmate's home that was kind of in the neighborhood. And then just watching the day unfold on the television and just soaking it all in. The next day, we didn't go in the office because the language school wasn't open the next day. But the following day, which was a Thursday, Thursday. Following day was a Thursday. I went in and I wrote an email to the chief of Africa division, point to point. Young guys got it all figured out.
Right.
And I was basically like 4 sentences. And I said, the world's just changed dramatically. I joined because of Al-Qaeda's attacks in Africa. Africa division almost certainly is going to get asked to give up resources. If it is, I'd like to be on that list. That didn't go over well. Didn't go over well at all. And the response I got was pretty brutal. And
sit down and shut up.
Yeah, it was even worse. Just sort of questioning my loyalty and a lot of things. And now, I've had a little bit of life experience coming in. I mean, I'm 31 at this point, maybe even 32 at this point. So, I've got colleagues that are 23, 24. This would have destroyed their mind probably for quite a while. And of course, I get called in to talk to, the deputy group chief on Friday. So Friday, I go into language on Friday, and they're like, there's a note for me that says, you need to report to headquarters right now and see the chief of the division. It's like, oh, Jesus. Okay, this is interesting. So I drive over to headquarters, and I go into where our group sits, and I first meet with the deputy group chief, and he's like, what did you do? Why'd you do that? And I'm like, well, because something awful just happened, and I want to pitch in. And he's like, and this is why he's like, oh, that makes sense. And then I talked to the group chief, same conversation. I talked to the cops of the division, the number 3, same conversation. Talked to the number 2, the deputy chief of the division, same conversation. And then I get to the chief, and of course, I guess that 12 funneled to him. He won't meet with me now. So I was like, okay, fine. Such is life. 3 weeks later, about a third of the division was surged, and of course, I was on the list. Right, to CTC, to our counterterrorism center. So that's fine. It's, I don't obviously wish 9/11 happened, but whatever. This all worked out for a reason. So I joined the counterterrorism center probably like October 1st, 2001.
Wow.
Yeah. So when I arrived, I don't know, hundreds of people were pouring in. Hundreds were being redirected from all over the building or from the field.
What was the atmosphere like in CTC at that time? Because, I mean, as a young guy, brand new guy, you got to feel like you're getting loaded into the breach here, right? Like, it's on.
Totally. And exactly. No, that's exactly how it felt. And it's like, all right, where am I going to land? What are they going to ask me to do? Like, this is the dog barking and chasing the taxi. Now I caught it, right?
Yeah.
I'm in the terrorism center. And so the weirdest thing happened, but it's not weird in retrospect. But, hundreds and hundreds of people are being searched at the center. So they're just putting them in slots, that they had. And then they're getting more slots. It's a bureaucratic thing and putting people in these slots. So because I had some time in Greece, I was put in this task force, focused on Marxist, Leninist, a certain urban guerrilla group. And was on this team for like 2 months, just sort of sitting there and just reading all about the history, reading all these collections of cables that are like your read-in material when you join this team. But I didn't think I was going to be sticking around this team, just given that the priority was clearly not Marxist, Leninist terrorist groups. So within I would say within 2 months, I finished up there. And the Counterterrorism Center set up a thing called the Current Action Staff, which was their 24/7, specifically Counterterrorism Center Watch Center. And it's one of those things where, like, I have the shift at 3 a.m, and some immediate comes in from Riyadh that says some senior guy was captured or whatever. I'm calling the director of CTC, waking the director up and saying, this just happened. This was an incredible job. I had it for 6 months. I like to refer to it as my master's degree in Al-Qaeda, in sort of global core Al-Qaeda, because I saw everything and I had to see everything, and I was studying it so I understood it. Separately, there was a famous sort of like 5 o'clock meeting that Director Tenet had every day to just sort of go over where we are on everything. people from our team were the note takers for that, for the counterterrorism center. So there's always notes that could be sort of researched, back in time when we need to. So the things I was able to get exposed to during those meetings as well, to see exactly everything we're doing, how we do it, what we can and can't do, what partners can do, what they can do. I mean, it was invaluable for me to see sort of behind the curtain on all things counterterrorism, which is what I wanted. So it was a fantastic
Out of
learning experience.
curiosity, I mean, from your perspective, where you sat at that time, what was your take on Al Qaeda? Like how prevalent they were. I mean, I remember as I was like, geez, 19, I think, 18 or 19 when 9/11 happened, and just watching the news, it's like this octopus that has its tentacles and everything, and we tend to sometimes build these things up like it's Cobra Commander or something like that. But I mean, I am curious, since you were there, sort of like almost a boots on the ground perspective, what your take was on Al Qaeda and the threat emanating from that group.
Well, again, I'm not super experienced at this point, and I'm seeing tons and tons of potential threat reporting from all around the globe. And you're also seeing an ungodly amount of leads from all around the globe, because everyone's erring on the side of documenting and sharing, so many partners. So you're awash in data, and it's pretty overwhelming. Yeah, I mean, there was a graphic I recall from the fall of 2001 that was on, like, everyone's office. It was like the 8.5 by 14 Al Qaeda org chart.
Mm-hmm.
And it had probably somewhere between 16 and 21 people on it. There's probably only photos for like 2/3 of them. And I'll just take a second to say, you roll forward to like 2004, 2005. We have an understanding of 2001 Al Qaeda that's 400 people deep and a full order of battle. Who was doing what?
Right.
Who reported to who was trusted who. Like, it's remarkable what we did in that interim sort of 3-year period to sort of understand the enemy we were facing.
And you were starting to put some red X's through some of those pictures.
Yeah.
Yeah. Do you think prior to 9/11 that the reason that it started out 6 to 21 is because the United States intelligence apparatus just didn't have that much interest in AQ, or do you think that conducting ops against them gave us a deeper insight?
So absolutely the latter. I think, pre 9/11, we have a lot of over the horizon, not a lot, we have a handful, sort of over the horizon collection capabilities that are sort of in the mix, whether it's, human, SIGINT, whatever, and trying to sort of map it all out and understand it. What we gained over 3 years is a crazy amount of in the weeds understanding of every single individual, down to their, like, over time you're building out bios of their whole family, their family connections, and that starts to illuminate relationships that connects something you read somewhere else. You're like, okay, now that totally makes sense why that person's working with that person, because their daughter is married to his son, that kind of a thing. So I would say that our understanding was, we weren't, yes, I was gonna say we weren't in Afghanistan. Of course, we were, sort of in the Panjshir, but that's different. We're not sort of there among them,
Right.
kind of in the mix, and on a war footing. So from a collection standpoint, there's a very big difference from just sort of general collection and then being on a war footing, even with your collection posture. So the chart that I described, I think, really reflects kind of a pre 9/11 understanding of the entity. Now, I'm sure our knowledge was deeper than that, but what I'm saying is this was at least a leadership org chart.
Right. Right.
It was really if you're looking at a leadership org chart and there's 21 people on it, you're like, check your watch. This isn't going to take that long if we're going to really take this seriously and go after them. But obviously, it's not 21 people. So, but we had to really build out that understanding through our collection posture. Yeah, go ahead. Sorry.
I'd like to ask you one question. I'd like to rewind back to you going into the CIA, because you're a professional. You are a lawyer, and obviously, the agency has the Office of General Counsel. They have, so for somebody and this might be for a question that people out who are already professionals have out there. For somebody who is like a lawyer or a doctor and doesn't want to go to OMS, or an engineer and doesn't want to go into DS&T, but they want to be a case officer, is that a battle you have to fight if you have a profession and you don't want to be filtered into that professional track, like OGC or OMS or DS&T?
Great question. I don't think so, and here's why. For the DO, a lot of, certainly for a lot of operations officers, they want you to have some kind of a graduate degree, and they don't care what it is, or to have like a real special forces pedigree. My training class was small, but 20% were lawyers.
Wow.
So I'd say 20% were lawyers and 20% were special forces backgrounds, right? So you start looking at, there was a couple of archaeologists. Interesting. You have a lot of different types of things. Now, it's quite possible that at some point along the way, someone could have pulled me aside and said, you know what? You don't have the right psychological profile for the job you applied for, but would you consider this? I bet that happens to some people. I don't know that experience, but I wouldn't be surprised, because why? If someone can, pass the poly and get in and have the clearance and all the things, find the right place for them, and certainly don't leave them in a place they shouldn't be, right? That's just, we're all not going to get the best out of them, and they're not going to get the best out of themselves, So, that's a great question.
So after that period of time, you get put into another section in CTC that's kind of focused on, like, it sounds like personality driven, looking at OBL, Zawahiri, KSM. Tell us about that.
Yeah, so there's a lot of change happening in the Counterterrorism Center. There's a lot of, with all these new resources, there's reorganizations, there's more field positions, PCS postings established, so basically you're trying to just you're trying to build the center you need. So both from a headquarters and a field standpoint. So new offices appeared, to include ones that were very focused in on senior most HVTs. So I got on a team and was very focused on Al-Qaeda leadership figures. Our office, there's always going to be some sort of like, when there's change, there's a lot of people that are uncomfortable with change. So with the sort of advent of our office, I think it may have ruffled some feathers on some other offices who previously were going after the same targets, or individuals associated with those targets. In other words, leads to those targets. And so we had a lot of fits and starts about how to actually like get people in the field to dialogue with us about our specific mission, despite the fact that it was about, several leadership figures at the top levels of Al-Qaeda. The one thing we did that I think was a way of addressing that rapidly for our office is we had a lot of ops officers on the team, and there was gaps in the field. So we surged people forward and started filling all those gaps. So we had multiple officers in various bases on either side of the Duran line, including as like a base chief here and there, depending on the grade of the individual. So suddenly we were, sort of the value add in the field for some gaps. And even in O2, those gaps are forming because there's a giant sucking sound coming from Iraq already. And there's people that were like in the sort of Pak Afghan theater who are now moving over and positioning themselves for what's to come in the Middle East. So there was a lot of gaps, which means there was a lot of opportunities. So people from our team started filling them, and I was one of them. And I went out and I started out bouncing around different bases, and basically serving as a line officer, working with our liaison partners who were working jointly with us to pursue Al-Qaeda targets and leads, and try to exploit individuals when they were apprehended, look at their pocket litter, talk to them, whatever, and then find leads to the next person, next rung up the ladder. That went on, for quite a few months. And that was, I got incredible experiences there, to include even being basically an acting base chief for 2 months at the beginning of 2003, which was my first sort of field leadership experience. And you can say, like, that's way too soon in terms of my experience. My counter would be like, well, I have quite a bit of depth at this point on the target set, and I also have some life experience before I got here. And one thing that was really wonderful with the station leadership team at the time, they actually had like a huge number of, it was like less than 10, but it was all these retired officers, old, Cold Warriors who were awesome, rotating through and doing long-term TDYs and just rolling up their sleeves and doing work. And I couldn't have been in a better environment, sort of just being shoulder to shoulder with these guys. And when I was sent to one of the bases to be the chief for 2 months, the chief of station sent two of those guys with me. So I had, guys that were like, Cis threes when they retired, 3-star general types, and had, 4 decades of experience, and were still in it for the right reasons. And so I felt, you feel unstoppable. You're like, okay, cool. I'm going to do what I do, which is, we all get paid for our judgment. So I'm going to use my good judgment. I'm going to use my subject matter expertise on this target set. I'm going to, leverage these two amazing guys who've given their entire lives to mission, and learn from them. And I'm going to lean into, liaison operations and try to maximize a really challenging relationship, a really challenging liaison relationship. And in fact, I had an interlocutor for a period a liaison interlocutor who was not on Team America. Let's say that. He was, I think, he was fairly problematic, probably the most problematic over my tenure in South Asia, of dealing with partners. And it was my first one. So pretty interesting. Yeah, he was a card.
And so you went on from this assignment to dealing specifically with that region of the world, going on TDYs over there, as you alluded to, that this became sort of like a regional focus for you.
Correct. Yeah. So very much South Asia focus, very much core Al Qaeda focus, nothing else. And I stayed on that. So it was a lot of months of TDY in second half of 2002, first half of 2003. I traveled to the other side of the border in the middle of 2003, and I was there for let's say TDY for about 6 months. That was supposed to be a 3-week TDY, turned into 6 months, like as all good TDYs do. And then I quickly came home at the end of it, just to PCS back. So I came back to do all my paperwork so that I could PCS back to Kabul at December of 2003. So I was there December 2003, December 2004. So all told, 18 months of Kabul happens, basically from the middle of 03 to the end of 04. That was, again, tremendous and different. It's a different operating environment. There's a different set of resources, a different set of priorities with partners. I was able to go out with Special Activity Center officers for a mission in Gardez or something like that. I don't remember exactly where I was, but somewhere in down in the southeast of Afghanistan for a week. Really great exposure for me because I don't have a military background, so I'm starting to really open my eyes to a whole range of different types of units and what they're capable of. And again, that's invaluable for me as I move up the chain, to just really truly understand what's happening and where it's taking place and what can and can't be done. That year and a half was tremendous. We that was a period, as I said before, where I think we radically advanced our knowledge of the enemy set. And right before then, I would say like in '02, I would say second half of it, well, not second half, but after 9/11 and all of '02, we're just getting shoveled data at us from everything, every service on Earth. We are collecting everything we possibly can. And like the challenge is if you're looking at, okay, somebody says, where's bin Laden? You could almost make an argument that he's anywhere because there's so many data points have been pushed our way. It's almost incoherent, such that someone could, say, okay, there was a sighting. Like literally they'll say like, we think there was a sighting in Parachinar, Pakistan or something like that. Well, then we start doing scrubs of that and you suddenly find that you can come up with an argument for why he could be there. So now we have to like think about, all right, what kind of resources are we going to put there? How are we going to do it? You talk to the Pakistanis, you say, how do we do that? It was a very imperfect period of time where you're frenetically running at a lot of data and, a lot of false, I wouldn't even call them false positives, just sort of like false avenues. And like I said, as I get to second half of '03 and then into '04, I really feel like we start to refine our actual accurate picture of what we're facing in that period.
How was it for you? Because I know you came in prior to 9/11, but you were very much part of like the 9/11 crew. But were there, in your experience, were there kind of two different agencies at this point in time? The side that said, "Hey, like our job is strategic intelligence. It is not this on the ground tactical level stuff." Was there? Was that? Can you please tell us your experience around that?
Yeah, and I think the answer is there was yes and no, right? Like it depends is the constant case officer answer, but because I was in the counterterrorism center and in places that were, I was constantly interacting with Near East division officers, right? They certainly were everywhere doing the hard things. They might not be as focused on as myopically on the Al Qaeda target at certain times. They've got other priorities that they're pushed on. So you have cadres of officers in other locations who did hard work in hard places. And I don't want to oversimplify and say like then there's the people who like were Europe division and in a nice place and weren't really battle tested, because that's not fair to say about them. But there's you see reverbs of this now when sometimes you'll have these conversations. You'll hear somebody say like, we spent too much time, we're over focused on CT, we need to get back to the core mission and get back to our roots, and we're behind the ball on great power competition, and we got to like, there's truth in those statements and there's also sort of overdone aspects to those statements. And so you go back to that period and you can make the claim and say, okay, well, the '90s was the peace dividend and it was a time of downsizing and maybe it didn't have the same, focus you needed. And then you're going to have other people say, yeah, but we had the Balkans and a ton of people went through there and it was gritty. So it's unfortunately, it's an it depends answer, because I think it's about who you work with. And, there's certainly the people who stay in the fight and who they are, you worked with them. And then there's the people who just show up and do their, quote unquote war zone tour. And there's nothing wrong with that.
Right.
But that there's going to be a limit on what you can do because you don't have the context. It's like drop me in Beijing in 2012 and tell me to figure out how to do ops. I'm not going to do them well. This is going to be a liability.
Right.
I can do my, denied area tour, or we can make the same sort of descriptors, and doesn't make sense.
Right.
So you sort of have to think about how you grow into your requirements.
Right.
And you need you need expertise. I'm a huge proponent of expertise, and we struggle with that in the DO because it kind of comes and goes in waves, whether we like want to have experts or whether we just want to have generalists who can be put anywhere. And there's strengths and weaknesses to both. So
and then
long answering your question without.
No, I appreciate it, because I also, if you don't mind, comparing this to sort of Iraq, because you said that there's the whispers of that now, building up, and and then through that process, we know that it was, one of the largest stations outside of headquarters. And where in, Afghanistan and other places in South Asia, you had this AQ threat, but then you have this massive presence in Iraq that I think was kind of aimless at times, initially focused on the Iranians and then kind of magic wand that away. What did you see a big difference in the assets, the resources, and the attitude towards both those theaters?
Yeah, I think, as I said, sort of late '02 and into '03, really beginning of '03, I'm watching people who are in the theater I'm working in, and they're people I'm looking up to. And like, partly I'm working and working my tail off. At the same time, I'm looking up going like, that's someone I want to be like. That's probably a role model. I want to get to know that person and figure out how to do this stuff. And then they're gone. And they're getting set up for some infiltration into Iraq from one of the sides. And there was a lot of that. And yes, it created opportunities, but this is a war, and it's, we just got smashed in the mouth a couple of years back. Like, you don't want to see that. You want to see all the resources put in
Right.
to finish. And, obviously in retrospect, you look at it and go like, I always talk about bin Laden, and I say, the raid itself, the targeting that went into it's fantastic. But it was 9.5 years after 9/11, right? If you're on September 12th, 2001, you're just a citizen in America. You're not like, God, I hope they get him in the next 9.5 years. Like, that's not even a thing, right? And even bin Laden himself was probably like, I'm probably dead in 60 days.
Right.
What do I need to do to sort of make sure this thing keeps going, So, what's the phrase, the main thing is to keep the main thing the main thing. After 9/11, do you just go all in and make sure that can't happen again? Because that's, things get diluted. I mean, I can tell you, having spent time in Afghanistan, 03, '04 is one thing. Sitting there in 8 and 9, it looks like 8 different missions,
Right.
10 times the people, 10 times the contractors, and just a jump ball for prioritization.
Yeah. Yeah.
Ed, I'd like to ask at this point, I mean, we're talking 2004, 2005. You accepted a couple of different assignments in South Asia. I'd really like to hear your perspective from this is the early years of the war on terror still that we're talking about here. I'd really like to hear about the liaison relationship that you had with the host nation intelligence service, and like what that was at the time and how that developed or degraded. I mean, whatever the case may be.
To some extent, it's in part defined, and this is not a cop-out to protect their integrity, but in part it's defined by where the enemy is. When the enemy is in urban areas, they're gettable. And working with our partner, we had incredible success going after them in, what is effectively called the settled areas, but it's the cities. Where they have infrastructure and they're on their phones and they're on computers and they're leaving a whole lot of different, breadcrumb trails to themselves. And we're able to exploit that. In the fall of '03, after a lot of success against them, they move into the tribal areas, the federally administered tribal areas of Pakistan, which really shouldn't be called federally administered at all.
Right.
It's it's an ungoverned place, which Al-Qaeda always in its life cycle took advantage of, is ungoverned, poorly governed regions. And this particular region also happens to be a place where they have relationships. Some of their elders have relationships with other elders going back to the Soviet jihad days. So you have kind of the makings of a complex safe haven that there are no easy ways to reach out and touch, let alone collect on. So we have to develop a whole new way of doing business. And all of it is very hard for our partner. All of it. it's, they have bases in some of these places that they don't leave the wire at all because they can't. I mean, it's going to be a problem for them really quickly. Um, you know, that might allow for, signals collection or something else. Who knows, whatever else they're doing. But it's a problem. And working with them, we're constantly asking and pushing them, past their comfort zone, understandably, because, there's these opportunities are always fleeting, and you really can't self-limit when you have an opportunity to solve a problem, take someone down. Otherwise, you're gonna miss the opportunity. So we're constantly pushing them to do things, and we're pushing them not just to do hard things, we're doing a high volume of hard things. I mean, I've been in plenty of liaison meetings where the agenda itself is 18 items, and they're all like, I got Washington breathing down my neck on them all, understandably, just given what they are. There's some of them are about threats in various countries that are emanating from these guys in the Fatah. It's no shortage of that. And over time, the relationship degrades because, we come to conclusions from a policy standpoint, and this is well documented, where we have to start taking more unilateral actions that are pretty severe.
That puts them in a difficult position.
Yeah. And again, I'm not trying to defend them and say like they were forced into a situation where they had a bad relationship with them, but I'm just saying what the facts were on the ground along the way is we then, started to ramp up what we were doing. And of course it even takes policy changes on our side, lots of, intelligence collection, lots of failures. And then we go and we talk, people higher up in the chain will talk with the NSC and say, hey, we need to change the parameters for how we're, prosecuting this war.
And I should probably point out, I don't know if you want to say this or not, Ed, but the largest covert operation, I believe, in American history was taking place in this country at this time with the Predator program. Which, again, I mean, it has political repercussions at high levels.
Yeah, and that story, I'm sure, will be written in detail in time. And, and that's sort of, I think, what I'm getting at with, like, there's methodologies that work right up until they stop working.
Mm-hmm.
So maybe at some point, you have a cordial sort of collaborative targeting discussion that gets you to a yes, and then it gets you to a I'm not sure, and then it's no, and then you have several no's in a row, then you have missed opportunities, and through other means, those missed opportunities were pretty serious. And suddenly, what happens is those things are, those facts are dutifully sent back to Washington. Our analysts dutifully write up what is taking place, and leadership figures will ask the very simple question, well, what can be done? And that generally drives change in policies that allow for more authority, from a unilateral standpoint to do things, which you have to know it's going to rapidly degrade a relationship when you start taking very aggressive actions on your own, despite what they want you to do.
And another thing I'd like to ask you about is in 2006, there's a cross-border operation that we did. Could you illuminate us a bit on how that came about?
Yeah, I think there's a book, The Way of the Knife. Have you read that one?
Yeah.
Yeah. I always joke, this is so mean. I've not met the author, but it's like the bottom 10% of a really good story. I shouldn't say that out loud. I'm sorry.
Don't worry, it's live. Nobody will remember this.
Yeah. This is during the time when, I think we were, as a government, some of our own internal dysfunctionalities included, a lot of discussion of whether Title 10 or 50 on a particular situation. Obviously, when you're in a place like Afghanistan and there's a, the warfighting machine is there, it's very easy to delineate Title 10. But when you start working in sovereign countries that we're not in war with, there's a reason why Title 50 ops are preferred. And at the same time, we have capabilities. And what have I referred to? you have an enemy that is now in a safe haven in a hard to reach place that the host government cannot really reach out and touch. So what are we going to do? Just sit and watch it when we have a capability? But of course, it's a very big muscle movement. It's a political hot potato in a lot of ways. But again, what are we here for? Like, are we waiting to get attacked again or not? So like, this is what drives these decisions. And like I said, you can read that book and see, there was a cross-border, raid into northern Waziristan under Title 10 authorities, and it was, there was a lot of discussion. I can say, there was a lot of discussion in advance of that, saying, okay, what are we doing? Why are we doing it? What's the gain? But it was a good discussion. It was the right discussion, and ultimately, the raid went down, and it demonstrated, well, first of all, it had gains, and second of all, it demonstrated that this can be done, and that serves a lot of purposes. It serves purposes to our host partner who drags their feet. It kind of serves as a sort of like a bit of courage for our own policymakers to say, see, we can do these things. It's like, we're capable. And I can say from my perspective, at the time I was leading an interagency targeting team, some of what we look at when we're looking at these guys in the network is what external ops they're plotting, meaning what ops they're plotting that are against the US and our partners globally. And you have masterminds of various flavors in the tribal areas. And yes, theoretically, someone could hit them with a Hellfire missile, but we're not going to understand the plotting that's going on from that. So we need to have a capability to potentially, have boots on the ground and go get a guy. And, we can get the material, get the computers, whatever it takes, and even talk to them about what they're plotting, who their contacts are, who their operatives are, how it's facilitated, all those things. So that raid was, an example of a paradigm shift in a lot of ways, or a paradigm shift capability, let's call it that. And it was, what was that, January of 2006? So still pretty early on, right?
Yeah. I gotta believe it's a little frustrating. I mean, I've heard from other people that yes, the raid, this operation was successful. It demonstrated the capability, but the political fallout was such that it sort of precluded any further operations of that nature.
Yeah, but that's our own policy deliberation, right? So that's to me, I think the answer is yes, but I think that's a self-limiting on our part that
yeah.
was more politically driven by us. Now, that's easy to say. This still is a sovereign country. You do that too many times. I don't know what the ramifications are. But again, like with the bin Laden raid, and that's an extreme and easy example, when you have a target like that and it needs to get dealt with, we have the capability. And those moments, like 2006 and some subsequent operations that happened or were proposed and didn't happen along the way, is what got us very comfortable when the bin Laden compound was identified as a suspect bin Laden compound, that our range of options included ultimately what took place.
So after that period of time, you got an assignment at the working WMDs?
Yeah. So with the Counterterrorism Center, looking at weapons of mass destruction, again, looking at South Asia. I didn't leave the theater. I mean, I left the theater, went back to Washington, but in terms of my substantive attention, I maintained a focus on South Asia, just a narrow look at a target set within core Al-Qaeda that we were concerned, definitely historically and potentially currently at the moment, was looking for, opportunities for dirty bombs, looking at, biological weapons, anything. And so I did that for a year. Small team, really, really, really capable team. We got quite a bit done in that time. I was very, very proud of the team and what we were able to accomplish. Yeah.
And then you're back to Afghanistan.
Mm-hmm. Yep.
Chief of Base assignment, 2008, 2009.
Yep, chief of base assignment. That was, I have a hard time saying, like, when someone asks me, hey, what was your favorite tour? Because I've got a bunch, and this was definitely one of them because of the scope of work we had to do, the caliber of the officers we had on the team, the capabilities we had, and for my own, sort of um, development. Like, this was my 5th year in theater on the ground, and I feel like now I'm like sort of at the end, getting towards the end of my PhD at this point in Al Qaeda in South Asia. So it was we did I think we did masterful work there. It's our location was very proximate to the tribal areas, which allowed us um, incredible range of access. So that really informed all of our human operations. We Yeah, it was a wonderful
It
tour.
was, I mean, when you say it was a wonderful tour, I mean, I have to imagine in my mind's eye. Do you mean it was very gratifying to see like the intelligence operations actually leading to something with the paramilitary operations? Like you sort of like saw in real time the results of the collection efforts that you guys were making.
Absolutely, 100%. That's exactly it. I wish I could get into detail about the things that we did during that time, and also other sister bases around the way, and the collaboration we were able to do with some locations. The synchronicity cross border, because again, we're getting better at this thing. There's all these battles that go on over the course of the first 10 years, these internal battles, right? So you have Title 10 versus Title 50 conceptually. You've got agency versus FBI, but that quickly resolved itself. You've got agency DOD. You've got all of us in Pakistan against all of us in Afghanistan, and everyone saying, like, why are you this? Why are you that? Blood is on your hands. How can you work with them? Kind of things. You have all these sort of intersection points constantly happening. And I think during my time between 2008 and 2009, I feel like we had not resolved them all, but I think we have moved them into an incredibly manageable place. And we were working collaboratively with the people we needed to work collaboratively. And the results that we came from it is what we should have been getting all along.
How were you seeing the target set evolve? Obviously, like when we went into Afghanistan, it was to remove Al Qaeda, which we did fairly quickly, and then we have Taliban, we have Haqqani network, guys like it'll come to me, Sangin, and
Yep.
people like this. Like we have these players. Was the target list, in your opinion, was it expanding? Was it expanding appropriately? Were we sort of losing the plot?
Yeah. Oh, that's a great question. So, because I think the units that I was part of, we maintained focus on Al Qaeda, but there were other units. So again, we would start to expand our target set, but we always staffed it with personnel. So for example, on the interagency targeting team that I led, we went from single digits of people, which were largely just agency targeters, when we first stood it up, like literally like day one, to like 5 times that size, and incredible interagency footprint. Some agencies had 5 different people from their subject matter experts on the team at any given time, and some of them were experts in Al Qaeda, some of them were experts in Taliban, some of them were experts in Al Qaeda's external operations specifically, so kind of looking globally. So it was really getting down in that weeds and building out the teams. I think, yes, our mission expanded, but I don't think this was mission creep. I think as we further understood the enemy we were facing, we're building out the teams underneath it to specialize in it I would say without dilution. Like certainly from this targeting team standpoint, we weren't diluting the team at all. We just were working more hours and trying to just get all the messages out. I had this, I was thinking about all these different anecdotes before this call, and one you guys triggered for me, and I'm thinking of it now. I remember when I was sitting on this targeting team, we would just have unbelievable amounts of cables coming at us with requests to do all kinds of things, pass liaison information, ask them to do things, you name it. And I had a phone call one morning from a chief of station, which is odd that a chief would call me. That's probably bad form. They probably should have called our chief, but called me, and they were from a fairly decent sized European station, and they're like, "Hey, we sent you an immediate yesterday, and we haven't received any response yet." And I was like, "I know." I said, like, "I'm looking at my list right now, and I've got 25 immediates from yesterday, and all due respect, the thing you asked for is the least important of them all, and we're going to get to it, but it's just we have to do this like this." That's the kind of environment you have. So yeah, I mean, maybe there is a little bit of where the mission creep starts to pull up the resource, but you get to a point where you're sort of like inundated like that, and then you don't like if the workload tripled, you wouldn't know it. You know what I mean? Because it still feels the same. Because you're at that sort of tipping point, so we're already there.
So let's I'd like to jump forward to August of 2011 when
Yeah.
you took another chief of base position in Benghazi, Libya. And so this is a little bit before the infamous attack that everybody knows about at this point. But I'd since you were there beforehand, I'd really like to hear your perspective. That became very controversial in the aftermath. So like any sort of primary source material, is really important to help flesh that out.
So there was one big takeaway from my time there that there's I don't know what the solution is to this. We were talking with a lot of people. You're meeting people out on in that part of the country. It's really the rebellious part. Like these are the people that were always anti-Gaddafi. So people are very willing to meet with us. Civil society, aspiring politicos who want to like get their big seat at the table once the dust settles. But when you're moving around, you start seeing the militias. So the militias control neighborhoods, big neighborhoods, small neighborhoods, and it's like just gangs, right, all over the place, young people. And you start talking to them, and you get to know them, and there was this undercurrent, this interesting undercurrent, and it goes like this. There was discussion sort of at the political government to government in the press space level of where is the line in society, where's the line through Gaddafi's system where everyone above the line has to be prosecuted and certainly can't keep their job, but below the line people can keep their job because we need to make sure the water's running, the TCOM's working, you name it. And when you talk to these young people, they were very well aware of that conversation, and all of them were like, there's no line, we're going to kill all of them. And that was remarkable, and probably my biggest takeaway from that time period is like, and look at what's sort of come,
Right. And we already
Wow.
knew that from Iraq, though. We already knew that like the de-Baathification ruined any chance of maintaining the societal norms that they already had, or the infrastructure.
Yeah, no, that's
Like-
exactly right.
How do you think that situation played into the run up to the attack on the temporary mission facility in Benghazi the next year?
I think, there was no, if there was order, it was that chaotic order of neighborhood by neighborhood. So like, if there really wasn't order, this is, it looks like a city, but it's not a coherent thing. So, in retrospect, more defensible locations. How do you start to disarm people
Right.
in an environment like that? I have no idea. These are people that have been abused too for decades. Their families, their generations before them abused. I don't know.
Do Do you know why we kind of flipped on Gaddafi? Because we sort of didn't the U.S. basically tell Gaddafi, "Hey, you need to do X, Y, and Z to get off our shit list," and he did X, Y, and Z, and I thought he was good, and then we just kind of like, I don't want to say it was overnight, but we did have a real shift in our behavior towards him.
Yeah, I don't know specifically what happened behind the scenes with his relationship with, everyone who had cut those deals with him. Um, but you also, you remember this is happening amid the Arab Spring, so I don't know that we go to his. I don't think there's any scenario where people just go to his defense because the people are rising up. Like I just
Right,
can't see that.
right.
Um,
I get it.
Yeah,
the question though is like,
we unfriended him on Facebook at a certain point, though.
Yeah,
he unfriended him indeed,
yeah.
and then he was alive.
Uh, so right. Also around this time period was the Bin Laden raid.
Yeah.
I'd love to like probe your experiences for like kind of where you were when that happened and what the aftermath was, having so much experience in the region.
Yeah, so when the raid itself happened, I was the chief of operations for our department in the counterterrorism center that's covering South Asia. So this theater. So I was very much involved in this for the entire time, all the planning. So when it went down, I was in our office spaces. We had all these like operation centers set up all in numerous locations for different purposes, down at the White House, up on the 7th floor, in a couple of different field locations, all communicating with each other at the same time while the raid was sort of underway. And so I was in charge in our main vault with the large gaggle of people that were there contributing in various ways.
Any interesting anecdotes or insights you want to bring up from that period of time?
Well, I mentioned to you before, I'm a friends with Aaron Brown, and I did watch his interview with you guys. He does a really good job of talking through, his role was sort of as an executive assistant to the department chief, which was really great, because I the department chief was a tremendous guy, great friend and mentor. Um, I would say he came into my office one point. I don't remember exactly when this was. Maybe let's say a month, 2 months before the raid, maybe even 3 months before the raid. And he said, "So I need you to do something. I need you to basically run the department, and I'm gonna just focus on the Bin Laden stuff, basically." And I'm a very much like, to me, the answer is always yes. When you're asked by someone senior to do stuff, and if your plate's full, you're going to be working harder, you're going to figure it out. And he said, I need you to run the department, and I'm going to focus on the Bin Laden. And I said, absolutely not. I said, I've been on this issue for the entire time, and I can do both. And he took it, but I was like, it's like, this is
Right.
for me. I felt weird about it, but I'm like, absolutely not. This is
Right.
So, the next thing coming at you is the Syria Iraq department at CTC. And so now we're getting into that like 2012, 2013. I mean, again, you're hitting it just at that time as everything is coming undone in this part of the world.
Truly. And so you have, ISIS is becoming a really global problem during this tenure. They are, how do I characterize this as, we are having incredible engagement with partner services everywhere. Why? Their citizens are doing one of three things. They're making it to Syria and fighting. They're getting almost all the way there, let's say Turkey, and getting turned around, or they're at home in whatever country agitating online, in public, and talking about and basically self-radicalizing. So everyone is recognizing you have this global cancer growing rapidly that's metastasized in Syria. And the challenge is, from a policy standpoint, through much of this period, it was a collection target. There wasn't a lot of operations done, like what I'm saying, like kinetic, anything to sort of address it from a Title 50 standpoint, because there were other ongoing equities. There was lots of discussions about, what are we doing with Assad? What's Assad doing? Who's fighting him? Do they need help? All of that. That's, you think we can do multiple things, complex things at once, and we can, but sometimes things take a sort of back seat. And I would say that, during those 2 years, it was hard. It was certainly hard for my team too. You're telling the story, right? Collecting and telling the story of this cancer that's growing rapidly. It was frustrating. It was tough. I mean, we did fantastic work from a collection standpoint, and we certainly explored, there was, and particularly in the second year, there was a lot more discussion about, okay, there's going to come a time that we need to actually start taking action. What does that look like? And there was a lot of good collaborative discussion in the interagency on that, certainly in my second year, looking at what resources we can bring to bear on things. Because what you had was, it's funny, core Al-Qaeda stayed with me, the Pac Afghan guys, they had some nodes in Libya. They had a node in Syria. And by node, I mean, like, they had guys who traveled from that theater who are, and in the case of Syria, sort of now plotting from Syria.
Mm-hmm. Correct me if I'm wrong, but my impression at the time was that there was, to some extent, conflicting missions. That DOD's mission was to counter ISIS, but CIA's mission was Assad's got to go.
Yeah, but I didn't have that account, but I was certainly attended many meetings as a backbencher on that topic, and it's the question is how, right? Like,
right.
we have those conversations, but how do you even describe this? It's like there's not nice ways to do it,
right?
And it's a really hard thing to do. So, like, if you're going to do it, you got to do it.
Yeah.
And if you're trying to sort of come up with an elegant way to do it, you're not going to come up with an elegant way to do it. You're just going to talk about it. And time's going to go by, and then, the Russians jump in or whatever, others jump in and just stir it up in a way that you're like, okay, now we lost a window of time.
That's the question that Aaron may have mentioned it. David McCloskey certainly mentioned it when we had him on the show, that there's maybe a certain window when we could have acted, but it closed.
So I have this thing. I mean, I don't have this thing. This is a thing that's collective with a bunch of others I've worked with, including in the Pac Afghan space, is like, you have these sort of like principles that you filter your thoughts through, particularly in a crisis. You have a crisis situation or an urgent situation. So, like, with or Assad is an urgent conversation, right? So the principles are like, know that time matters. Don't self-limit. And, the costs of inaction are always bigger than you can possibly calculate. These sort of thoughts, they're very simple, and you guys have applied them in other settings, I'm sure, many times, but they're kind of easy guidelines. You're like, all right, you want to do something about Assad, then we're going to tell you how to do it. And it's
not pretty. Yeah.
It's not pretty. Let's not put limits on this. Like, if he's a problem and we're going to do this, like, let's do this. It doesn't make sense. And then if you're like, well, let's keep thinking and we can come up with a better idea. And then all that time is going by, and like then the conditions and the fact pattern changes. And so this is like a feature, and it relates to me to our Ukraine policy is, I kind of characterize it sometimes as like multiple days late and multiple dollars short the whole time. Like,
the targets are no longer valid because too much time has passed.
Right. we're just late. We're late to these hard decisions because we want them our way somehow. Somehow we have this control. What did Churchill? Was it Churchill said? It's like you can always count on the United States to do the right thing after they've tried everything else.
Yeah.
Really amazing phrase, right? Like that to me, like when I look at Ukraine, it's like we're doing the right thing. We're just doing it 6 months later than we should in each instance.
Out of curiosity, because obviously, I mean, Tito died of natural causes, but we saw what happened in Yugoslavia when Tito died, or Tito died. Like we didn't take him out, but we saw what happened in Yugoslavia. Then we take out Saddam, who is another, I would say, horrible human being, but also secular, not religious. Only religious to the point that it gets him clout.
Right.
And we see what happens in Iraq. Like when we look at a leader like Assad and we say we want to take him out, what is the discussion about? Okay, what happens the day after we take him out, and who every time we've taken a leader out, it hasn't gone well after that. Is there a point when we say maybe regime change is not the best? Maybe we suck at it.
Yeah, I mean, I think that's a fair position to come to, and that might be why we deliberate so long. There may be a reason why we're deliberating so long on these is because they aren't simple.
Yeah.
And because those plans, those day after plans, are not easy to make.
Right.
And certainly not easy to dictate.
Right.
So, there's a track record that we have as a country that probably is informing this mindset, this kind of pausing mindset.
Right.
It's a good point. It's a really good point.
Yeah, it's just curious. And then, so when, like Jack had mentioned, you have this DoD mission against ISIS, and you have this sort of agency mission against Assad. And obviously, a lot of the people who are rogering up to fight Assad, we don't know who they are. Like, how does that look from sort of an intelligence perspective when when you're not quite sure who these guys that are rogering up are?
This is a fantastic question, and it's very, very uncomfortable, right? Your first thought is, okay, well, there's groups fighting the Syrians. Who are they? And let's see who we can meet and make assessments. And that's a process, and
Right.
That's difficult, and it takes time. And while you're doing it, we're then looking at the data, and you're looking at these people, and you're looking for their networks, and you're analyzing it. And over time, you're discovering derogatory aspects of concern. And this stuff is not happening. That whole cycle doesn't happen over a course of a week. That whole cycle might come over 4 months, 5 months, 6 months.
Right.
And you're like, all right, the leadership of this group is linked up with this other group, and this other group is just declared their allegiance to Al-Qaeda in Syria, and I don't know what we should do with that, but we have a problem because that first group is assessed right now to be our best option.
Right.
Now
Right.
Now what? And that's the kind of stuff that happens, and you're like, this is hard even inside the building, inside the agency, when you're going and talking to your colleagues, because everyone's busy. Everyone's working their ass off on an incredibly complex problem, and everyone's stressed. And you're going to come and be like, hey, your baby's not just ugly, it's really, really ugly. And that just doesn't, it's a hard way to, and now your relationships that you have when you walk into those conversations matter. How much you've been collaborating with that office before you get there matters. And also taking it to them before you sort of shoot it up the flagpole. Because there's no shortage of people somewhere that are like, ooh, I'm going to use that to go after that one person who kind of screwed me over once. This is going to make them look bad, whatever. Try to do the things, do it as a professional, do it the right way. But when you do it right, it's still incredibly bad news, because these guys, if you're working on the Syria task force, that's not where I was, Syria Iraq department, you're not the CT part, but this other part. Yeah, I mean, it's an incredibly difficult problem.
Yeah.
Particularly with all the bits that are placed on you. And then, we're coming at you saying, okay, that one thing you finally figured out is actually a terrible idea.
Yeah, and it's tough because like talking to Jack Devine and some of the other guys who were involved in covert actions when it was against communism. Sometimes we sided with guys that we didn't want to be neighbors with, because they were the anti-communist forces in the area.
And I think that's reflected in the stutter stepping that the Obama administration made. That you can see, like, the guys that I talked to who are kind of like more on the ground in Jordan and Turkey and Iraq, it was very much like these operations, advisory missions, training, etc. It was getting turned on and off almost on a daily basis. And I have to believe that was because of some trepidation that was happening up at the National Security Council level.
Yeah, I watched that bit with Jack Devine too, and there were some really interesting points he raised in there about like sort of where, sometimes where the decision making lies. And when you have when those kinds of decisions are being managed at the National Security Council level, it's really hard to do the work. It's unique when you have, the stars line up and you have someone like Leon Panetta who has enough respect and clout across the administration and even with like the Congress that a lot would, during his tenure was delegated to him in terms of authority to do things that in other iterations would be sort of held at the National Security Council level.
Mm-hmm.
And, what happens when someone like Panetta, and I would say like during the course of my career, Tenet, Hayden, Panetta, and even Burns had this kind of juice. Then they could internally delegate, authority to a, director CTC for something. As long, there's like always informing, the Panetta will always know what's going on and is getting briefed along the way. But, those kind of scenarios are much, much better. But when you're in what you just described, and that sort of like that fits and start era of like, I call it the Wither Assad era, of the later Obama years. There's a lot of kind of policy, sort of
hand
like,
wringing.
Right. And what happens is the scenarios and the situations don't get better. Indeed, they get worse. They get more complicated. And so what happens is, we might have a situation and say, okay, well, someone should write a paper that sort of characterizes this one issue so we understand it. Right. And then the paper gets written. It may take 6 days, may take 8 days. Another policy meeting happens, it's briefed. But in those 8 days, something on the ground has changed. And now someone's like, yeah, but what about that thing that just happened Tuesday? All right, well, let's, I'm being facetious, but it's like, let's task another paper and like see what are the implications of this? And like, you see this stuff roll. And what happens is decisions don't get made. And then the problem gets worse. And, we've seen that on a range of really, difficult topics. It's not just Syria. It's Afghanistan, it's Ukraine, it was Libya. Like these are, and I'm not saying these things are easy, but
yeah,
your job in those positions is to make very hard decisions with incomplete information.
And not just risk mitigate into infinity.
Correct.
Yeah.
So
I could pick your brains about Syria all day. I'm gonna try to hold myself back a little bit because I want to jump in. I want to make sure we have some time to talk about Ukraine, because your next assignment was to Kiev, where you ended up working as the active chief of station even for a little bit. In the, what are we talking about now? 2013, 2014?
14, 15.
Uh-huh. Okay, so you were there when the Russians start making these encroachments, the little green men and all of that starts happening.
When that stuff happened, I wasn't there. I got there a little after that, in the fall when I first arrived. So the, looking at it through an American prism, which is never the right thing to do, but like it was kind of, to me, it was like their 9/11 moment. In meeting with our partners, what you see is people who are working incredible hours and trying to turn over every single rock that they could to try to figure out how to, understand the threat, disrupt, Russians operating on Ukrainian soil to include, in the capital and other cities, assassination teams, you name it. Build out partnerships, bolster partnerships, and just get support. And it was, incredibly, I would say inspiring for me because it reminded me of us sort of after 9/11, just sort of people rolling up their sleeves and just going where the work was needed and getting it done. The Ukrainians have an incredible fighting spirit, and to me, like they're almost like a nouveau Mossad in some respect. Like I really think that whenever this thing ends, so for example, when this thing ends, those who've been identified as having committed various atrocities, like the Ukrainians are going to hunt them all down. Like that's coming, and it may take 20 years or whatever, but that's going to be a feature of the future, without question. From my experience with them, they are incredibly capable, and
but that didn't come out of nowhere. I mean, 2024 Ukraine is not 2014 Ukraine.
No, it's not. No, it's not. And but over time, they've been battle tested. I mean, they were, it's small units, in that time period, 14, 15, 16. I mean, there's lots of militia units at the time. You have these, oligarchs who might be from like Dnipropetrovsk or something. And that's like their territory or whatever. And they've got militia groups, and they're a little worried. They're not like on team Poroshenko at the time, but they're definitely not on team Putin, because team Putin wants all their stuff. And, whether it's mines or, some car factory or all the farmland or whatever. So they send their militia groups to fight. So you have, Spetsnaz units that are, small, but very capable in different services. You've got militia groups, and you've got people just like fighting as hard as they can. And very different from what it is in 2022 when the full invasion starts. But they built it up over time, and thankfully it wasn't sooner that the full invasion came. Excuse me.
Could you tell us a little bit more about like that buildup? Like I want to just to cut to the point and ask you the question straight up.
Sure.
I'm very interested to ask about like that CIA Ukraine relationship and how that developed, 2013, 2014, and how that sort of expanded as time went on.
Yeah. There's a fantastic article by Adam Entus in the New York Times from about February.
Hey, Ed, I'd like to interject here. There's a fantastic article written by Jack Murphy in December of 2023.
It's a controversial
It's a bit controversial, but it talks all about the
story.
CIA and the JSOC involvement in the Ukraine sabotage. Check that one out.
Oh, okay. Yeah. Let me, I'll definitely look that up. Thank you, D. Yeah, I mean, what I can say is, this relationship has been growing, since the beginning. We, on our side, invested a lot of resources into understanding all the capabilities and opportunities that the Ukrainians presented. Not surprisingly, others like Defense Attaché and others are like, hey, there's other opportunities here. We need to be pushing on that too. But I would say that we sort of kicked open the door on, the Ukrainians kicked open the door and said, let's figure this out on how to partner with them. And it's been, I would say just a steady increase in creating a really special, relationship. And, like I said, I think we needed that time. I think we needed that time before 2022 so that we were in the best possible position for that. Because if 2022 happened in 2016, we would have been. I don't think the same scenario plays out at all in terms of our support.
There was and is like this sort of like gradualism taking place. Like, for instance, the Javelin missiles, which were much harped upon during the invasion. My understanding was that those got approved at the tail end of the Obama administration to be shipped to Ukraine and arrived during the early Trump administration. Like this stuff happened kind of slowly, didn't it?
Well, so look at now we have a full-on war happening in there, and you have all this incrementalism that's happening just since February of 2022 in terms of our support, which is much faster than the sort of incrementalism that took place between 15 and 22, but it's wholly inadequate still. We're not exploiting Putin's vulnerabilities. He's not. I mean, he can't handle the pressure. Like, we need to be putting extreme pressure on him. What happened in Kherson, what happened in Kharkiv, what's happening now in Kursk. I mean, these are blows to his whole narrative. These are blows to all the narrative that's been preceded for the last decade. This is almost an emperor has no clothes moment with Kursk. I mean, let's see it's a little too early to, I think, to make a real assessment of what it means and what its value is. But I think it's exposing a couple of things. It's exposing, the myth of Putin's military,
the paper tiger.
It's undermining his political cohesion. It's challenging our own policy assumptions without question. And that's important because, again, this incrementalism on our side isn't serving the end game that is needed here. I mean, I think we really need to be ramping up our support. And there's a wide array of things we can be doing better and faster.
I'm gonna come back to that for sure, Ed.
I want to go back to 2014 real quick, if you don't mind,
yeah, sure.
Ed. Obviously the CIA is not operating without the president's authority. So the administration did care, but we didn't see any real action on the part of the administration, or at least any outspoken support. But the administration was still. Do you know sort of what that balance was for them at the time?
Yeah, I think so. I think what you have is people on the ground. So Ambassador Pyatt was the ambassador at the time, and he was an incredible, and still is an incredible champion for the Ukrainians. And I'm talking 14 and 15. He was, the Battle of Mariupol ends, and he's like, I want to go there tomorrow. He's making the RSO apoplectic because he's like, we need to be there tomorrow because I want to tweet from there. This guy was like incredible advocate. He was sort of meeting with every single official that he could and pushing out, so many messages a day saying, like, keeping Washington apprised on what's going on. And what happens in these scenarios is he's probably like the most informed policymaker, so to speak, in the whole architecture at that point. And everyone else has to catch up. And of course, they're busy with a range of other things, and including like, incrementally thinking about a range of other problems and sort of jammed up in those policy processes. So there's only so much bandwidth that gets into this space. And think about the time and all the other issues that are going on, because you've got Syria, you've got Libya, you've still got, questions in Afghanistan. Are we drawing down? Are we not? And, there's all this stuff. So now you've got this other thing thrown on the top. And the policy decisions move at a pace that kind of look like all the other issues. And, they're moving at the same slow pace. It's frustrating. But you're always, when you're on the ground in a place, you're seeing it closer than anybody, and you're probably going to have the loudest voice, and you're going to be the most frustrated about what's needed. You have to temper that too. You have to temper that, because you want to be heard.
I definitely want to return to this sort of a larger conversation about Ukraine, but just following somewhat in chronological order, I want to talk about your chief of station position that you took in Southern Africa. Another kind of change of pace for you, it sounds like.
Yeah, I mean, as I said, I was selected by Africa Division when I finished training, so now I finally get to the terrain, the turf that is under their domain 15 years later. And what an interesting experience. there's so many countries in Southern Africa that, were on the other side during the Cold War, and they were battlegrounds, and you still feel it. Like, I was almost just gonna say, you feel the remnants of it, but it's more than remnants. It's still there. It's still visceral in a lot of ways, because you have leadership figures in the government, in the state-owned enterprises, who, were fighting, from outside their country back into their country, and trained by the Cubans and the Russians. And so these are like individuals who lost brothers in arms, and now they're like running these countries, and they're running, like, I'm not just talking about a president, like a president of country. I'm saying the entire leadership architecture is full of people who, in many ways, they're going to look at us and they're like, we really don't have a relationship with you. Like, you're not you're not our friend, and you're not going to be our friend. And it's hard. It's hard. Because the history, like I said, the history is history for us. It's not history for them.
Mm-hmm.
And at the same time, you see these countries that have all this opportunity, and you wish we could have a good relationship with them. Because I saw this a couple of times, where it's sort of the policy swirl would be, if we could just, from a policy standpoint, build a bridge and get a better relationship going with some of these countries. Coalitions could be built to address, African problems with African solutions. And, that's the right mindset, but the relationships, I think, are going to be fractured until people die off in some cases.
What do you think that disconnect is? Is that some sort of discontent about the post-colonial moment in Southern Africa, or like, where does that come from?
It's, the colonial aspect is a piece of it, but I think the Cold War stuff is pretty acute. You look at apartheid in South Africa. Once the wall fell, I think you start seeing our government get suddenly vocal about apartheid being bad.
Mm-hmm.
It looks very opportunistic, to those who are there. They say, okay, apartheid was fine when it served the Cold War purpose, but now the Cold War is over and apartheid's bad, and you want credit for saving the day, not just changing the status quo. But it's like, you almost want, that's the thing. Like, there's a credibility challenge that we face. I've had interactions with individuals, limited interactions, because, again, like I said, they don't necessarily want to have a relationship with us. With finger wags in your face while you're meeting with them, and they're bringing up stuff from the 70s and 80s, some flap, and it's very important. But again, it's like you're going like, I don't even know what you're talking about, or you do, and you're like, that was literally 30 years ago. And I'm sitting here with, just to come back to a counterterrorism context, I'm like, I've got a packet of information that's really good about ISIS nodes in your country. We want to work with you on this. We're really good at this. Like, they'll take the information, but then it's crickets. You don't hear anything.
Do you feel that any of that is performative in the sense of, I don't know, we see the Chinese kind of moving in there now with money and infrastructure, and I think China is going to learn their lessons that you can't fund countries forever, but they're moving in there. That some of that is performative because they want a bigger payday for whoever's running the country at that point in time.
Like taking bribes, or what do you mean? Like,
yeah, not just it doesn't have to be bribes, because in a lot of countries, in a lot of countries like that, anything you give the government is a bribe, because we can't really track where the money goes. So it doesn't have to be a bribe in the way we see it.
Right. It could be a structural thing. Yeah. I mean, the Chinese obviously, have that whole predatory style with their loans and infrastructure. And I agree with you, like that can't endure.
Right.
Like, there's going to be wins they get out of it, but that can't endure as a strategy. It just doesn't make sense to me. But you sort of have this kind of mantra of like, it's my turn to eat. So you have people on the top of the pyramid, and then the Chinese come in, and then these things start happening. Like you just said, I mean, it's still going to happen because of that, just because of that, because someone's going to get their turn.
Yeah.
And that's a huge challenge. I mean, like we can and we do, and we do sort of brief these partners on like, look, this is what's coming. We can help you understand it. We recommend you try to understand it yourselves. Like, again, looking at the small print and all those things. But, we have to be willing. This is the hard part. We have to be willing to come in with something, a deliverable. So when we go into a country and say, a small country, and say, look, you're loading up your infrastructure with Huawei racks for your TCOM, and you really need to you need to understand the mistake you're making.
Mm-hmm.
And I've been in a conversation like this with a leader of a country who looks back, and she was talking with the ambassador and said, look, Siemens racks are expensive, and you're not helping. You're like, okay, that actually makes a lot of sense. Like if we really have a problem with, China sort of expanding and all the things that are going to come with, not just the predatory loans, but like them putting in their surveillance state, everywhere.
Mm-hmm.
Kind of got to put our money where our mouth is too. And it's not easy, but you got to prioritize these things. Like that to me is, we need to listen when partners say something like that, because that's not going to win you their friendship, but it's going to win you credibility. You can say, okay, cool. Here's what we're going to do. Give us the rack. We're going to help you get this one.
So the next step after Southern Africa is Cyprus for you. 2 years during when this is around the time frame that Russia is straight up invading Ukraine.
Yeah. Yeah. What an interesting thing to watch Europe coalesce. And, again, somewhat late decisions that probably would have been much better made a lot sooner. But you see countries, coming together on sanctions regimes. And this is crucial. And, in a place like Cyprus, you have an incredible amount of banking. Cyprus is like one of those gateways into the EU, and certainly for money. And if you look at the island, there's an enormous Russian presence. So, I mean, tens and tens of thousands of Russians. I forget how many tens before the invasion, and then it like tripled. And just an abundance of for us, you say like targets, but like it's an abundance of concerns. It's potentially an operating platform, not just financially, but for personnel, because there was that whole citizenship by investment program for a period of years, and you won't be surprised to know the types of people who like buy citizenship that's very expensive. It's going to tend to be people that are our adversaries, and in bulk. So Cyprus becomes a really important hub for ensuring stuff that Russia relies on typically isn't there for them to rely on. So it's not just a place to keep their money. It's shell companies. It's again, it's entree into Europe itself. So suddenly that starts to like close up. And I give incredible credit to them for making these decisions on their own, doing the right thing. They are a complex. It's a small country that's incredibly complex, has a complex history. I mean, it's occupied. It's almost always has been. I mean, it was a British colony up until 1960. If you look at it, 2,000 years ago, it's in dispute, and 3,000 years ago, it's in dispute. I mean, it's in
dispute today.
It's an interesting place with some very passionate, very intelligent very proud people, and also capable. And I'm very, very thankful. I didn't expect to end up there, and that was a real blessing. I really am really enjoyed my time there and the relationships that we had and that I've kept. I've got some good friends there, but again, looking at it from the optic of Russia's full invasion of Ukraine, a lot played out there because there's also a Ukrainian diaspora there that's sizable. So there was a lot of tension on the island. There's a lot going on there, and there's already a lot of tension, as you know, from even going back to the Syria days. Cyprus is right across the Met, like it's very close. It's a first stop for a lot of Syrians, and a lot of Syrians end up staying. So there's like a really taxed infrastructure on an island as is, and then there was this huge influx of Russians and Ukrainians, and it's a wild place.
In 2022, you're back in Kiev. Very different scenario than the first time you showed up there. Let's talk a little bit about like how things had changed from your first tour over there to this time.
Their government is pretty vast, in terms of, like their Ministry of Interior, is more than 100,000 people and lots of different sub units, border guards, you name it. I would say that, we have an incredibly broad set of relationships. That's just things I didn't even know existed when I was there before. Like, you know what I'm saying?
Like programs and so
Programs and unit, there's intelligence units, there's collection units, there's, cyber teams, you name it. Like there's so much. And what that shows me is just how much the relationship continued to grow over the years, including when I wasn't there. And just how important a partnership this is. And people, I think people still don't totally understand, like this is a special relationship. And we really need to make it survive this thing.
And I mean, I have to ask, not to put you on the spot too much, but just today, I believe it was The Economist quoted President Zelensky saying that we kept the West in the dark about our invasion of Kursk.
Mm-hmm.
They're in the dark. They knew nothing.
Yeah.
So there's something here that doesn't quite jive for me on a level that we have this hand in glove relationship.
Yeah.
But you're also kept in the dark about busting across an international border and invading a nuclear power.
Yeah. So this one's not too shocking to me. So I'll tell you what I think. And you've seen numerous instances over the course of this invasion, where Ukrainians are contemplating something, and you'll see an article that says, "Well, the White House or National Security Council asked them not to do it, told them to stand down," and even in some instances, like, "You're going to undermine our ability to keep supplying you if you do X." There's been numerous instances of that, and that's problematic. And you got to imagine how this works. When they share with us an idea that they have, it doesn't just sit. I mean, it's going to be discussed. It's going to be written up. It's going to go back. People back home are going to talk about it, and then that's when this happens.
Mm-hmm.
We do here. So now imagine what we're talking about here. Can you imagine any scenario where that's communicated back and the answer is cool? No, the answer is going to be someone get into the office of the president right now and tell him absolutely not. And Zelensky knows this, and he respects us, but he also understands that this is the reality. And again, this incursion happens And of course, like it had to leave a mark in advance of it. So somebody had to see that there was some kind of buildup, and maybe there was something being discussed that was picked up in signals, who knows. But you also see, and this is very much like, par for the course between both the Russians and the Ukrainians, bluffs, feints, things that make things look like they're actually going to happen. So I don't know, but I can envision people looking at this and saying, okay, look, there's a small buildup. I don't know if they're just trying to make it look like they're going to go across and try to draw troops from Donetsk to reinforce over here. I could see someone making that mistake and thinking that this was a feint of some sort. I don't know. I mean, this is a tough one. But
if you're the CIA chief of station and you learn about this invasion into Russia from CNN, isn't that like profoundly shameful and embarrassing?
In the moment, yes, but you get over it. I think because if you've been there, look, I'm not there anymore, so I can say it. Like, it's also frustrating when the machine from Washington comes in and says, "Tell them to knock X off." You're like, they should be doing X and more of X.
Right.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
But it's also, I'm sure Zelensky also feels betrayed by the fact that not only does the administration say no, but that it's in the New York Times the next day. Like,
right.
Like the right way to wage an information war against Russia right now is to tell the government that they're going to do something because it'll get out to the press immediately.
Well,
this is the problem, right? Go ahead.
No, finish your thought, please.
I said I think this is a real problem, and it's like it's developed over time, and it's and what happens is there's acrimony, basically what'll happen is like false valuations will get put on something, if something doesn't go right. This is a recipe for acrimony in unhelpful ways. And we are here because the Ukrainians have been very aggressive and have proposed a wide array of very aggressive things, fully understandably, because they're literally fighting an existential fight. We always, made the mistake post 9/11, like, oh, this is an existential fight. You're like, it never was an existential fight, but like we talked that way early on. Didn't really know, what we meant. This is an existential fight for Ukraine. It's very clear. So they're proposing a wide array of extremely aggressive things. And because of that history with us, 8 years preceding the full invasion, they're going to come to us and be like, hey, we want to do X in another country.
Yeah.
You're like, and then they're like, we get these, you get an instruction that says, tell them absolutely not. It's not much you can do about that, And again, this has all been
there isn't, but you would think, I mean, when the Battle of Maroi was happening in the Philippines, and we withdrew weapons shipments to the Philippines over the extrajudicial killings that the Duterte regime was doing at the time.
Yeah.
Like, there are actual legal obligations that the Central Intelligence Agency has about command and control. You can't just train people and give them bombs and be like, oh, okay, well, we didn't know. So it's very interesting to see this dichotomy between how we treat certain countries, but Ukraine gets so they blow us off. They blow off all the things we're telling them, and it's okay, and we just let them get away with it. We don't withdraw our ambassador. We don't stop weapons shipments. It's all like is that a de facto permission slip? You're giving them a hall pass?
I think it is. In this instance, I think it is. That's a really good question. I think it is because, now, and it's even more so because you saw people coming out, even including like the White House saying, their spokespeople saying, no, this is fine. This is fine. They're
You don't see Congress, like the Armed Services Committee or HIPSI and SISI, like speaking out against it.
Well, because you'll see guys like in HIPSI are like, we're not doing enough. I mean, you see that more on the Hill is that we're not doing enough.
And to focus on that point, and we've talked about this on the show before, earlier we mentioned the incrementalism that we saw, from 2014, 2015 and on. And now with the full invasion happening in 22, people have been saying, hey, why don't they have HIMARS? Why aren't we why aren't they
have
trained?
F-16s?
Why don't they have F-16s? And then we see the Biden administration shoot down like a potential NATO leader because he says he wants to train them in F-16s, and then it causes certain people to say, look, there are Americans, not this administration necessarily, but people who have been in power for a long time, who see this as a way to bleed the Russians, and we don't want to give the Ukrainians really the tools they need to really fight this and the way they need to fight it, as long as the Russians are bleeding. I mean, do you feel like there's anything to that, or do you think that it's just a difference in priorities?
I think it's a difference in risk assessment. I think I think it's a third thing. It's a misassessment of the risk. And I think that the misassessment is informed by a decade of pre-greasing the narratives that Putin has done so well.
Okay.
Well, isn't it? It's also like the entire Cold War intelligence assessments and these concepts of escalatory theory that we've had that have all been kind of smashed in the last couple of years.
Correct. I agree.
Yeah.
We take a quick break. Would that be okay?
Absolutely.
Yeah, go for it.
Thanks.
Yeah, do your thing. We'll hey everybody, so please join our Patreon. Just a few dollars a month can help keep us in the scotch, pay our rent.
Link is down in the description.
Yeah.
And this Friday we'll have Mike West.
Wait, we have a show on Wednesday, right?
No, that's not for us. That's
Oh,
not
okay.
A Team House episode.
Okay.
Mike West, he served in the Rhodesian Special Ops and South African Special Operations. He'll be on Friday. And guys, I appreciate it if you go and check out We Defy. It's available for pre-sale on Amazon right now. I had a hell of a lot of fun writing this book. It's exhausting, but it was a lot of fun.
So you've been a fan of this history and a student of this kind of history for a long time. Were there one or two things that you learned that just blew your socks off when you were researching this? Or did you already know everything kind of?
No, I definitely did not know everything. Like things that blew my socks off. I mean, I learned things about like the targets, the things that they were targeting with the green light program, to like parachute guys in with a backpack nuclear weapon. And so like the common thought, or I shouldn't say common because it's only published in like some obscure books, but the thought out there was that it was about parachuting behind Soviet lines in Western Europe if they invaded and blowing up troop formations or ports or bridges or mountain passes. But there's actually like that program was much bigger. And there were targets in Central America. There were targets in Asia.
Oh, interesting.
And, like choke points.
Yeah.
It was very much about like turning off a large part of the world, if that ever happened.
So it would have been like a Red Dawn scenario.
Oh, kind of, kind of. It would definitely. I mean, if not a Dr. Strangelove scenario.
Yeah.
Ed, thank you, for sharing these insights with us. I guess just to like wrap up that part of the conversation, do you want to talk at all about kind of like we've talked about the drips and the drabs and like very slowly warming up. I mean, I know the tap has been kind of open on a lot of DoD and also Title 50 programs, but it still seems like we're taking like half steps in a lot of ways
in Ukraine
towards Ukraine.
Okay.
Yeah. And I just wanted to like kind of probe your thoughts about like kind of where we're at today and where we need to be.
Right. Yeah, I mean, we're again leaps and bounds ahead of where we were in 2015, 2016, but it's insufficient, for the current fact pattern. We should be giving the Ukrainians everything they possibly need and giving them the authority to fight wherever they need to fight. Obviously, in third countries, that gets dicey and problematic, and that's a separate complexity, but certainly inside Russia. They've demonstrated repeatedly that they're about nothing except the targets, military targets. There may be one or two exceptions with sort of mouthpieces, propaganda mouthpieces, but everything they have struck has absolutely been, done in a manner that tried to ensure, no innocents were killed along the way. There's nothing like that happening with the Russians. I mean, in fact, almost all of their targets, particularly when they just launch the missiles and the Shaheds every couple of nights or every night, they seem to be just sort of meant for terror. Like let's target civilian infrastructure. Obviously, the energy space, that's, one can discuss whether that's a legitimate target or not. It is in war to take out people's energy capabilities, sure. But a lot of what they do with the Shaheds is aimed at just causing terror among the populations. So to me, again, we are sort of self-limiting because of our risk assessment that, whatever we determine is an escalation. Like escalation is an escalation is bad, and an escalation, whatever that is, equals nuclear response potentiality. There's a lot of leaps in that, and I think we're there. We've demonstrated that over the 2 years, the 2+ years of this war. That I'm not clear that Putin has an escalation definition other than his rule is at risk, directly at risk. The Ukrainians aren't doing anything to topple him. They're doing everything they can inside Russia to dismantle Russia's ability to strike Ukraine. So we need to be giving them everything they can to do that. And again, we've given them a lot of capabilities, but we've now said you can't use it for these projects.
From your perspective, I mean, what additional capabilities should we give them? Should we give them ballistic missiles to strike deep inside Russia? Should we clear them to conduct assassinations on Russian soil? I mean, like where do you see that? Where do you see that line existing?
That's a great question. I think that's ripe for, a discussion. I think if you're the president and you say, okay, what makes Putin pull out of the whole country? Like how do we defeat him here? Not have Ukraine lose, this sort of like passive statement.
Yeah. Let's skip to the end game.
Right. There's going to be, in this instance, there will be a covert action portion of this that needs to be an element. Mm-hmm. If we decide this is the end game we want, there's going to need to be a covert action portion of this for some of those things that you just discussed, because they're going to be dicey when they have to be managed in very certain ways, right? But we can do this. We can do this. We have the partner to do it. And the question is going to be, which stuff falls within the covert action space, which stuff is things that we say publicly, what things we're saying publicly, do they need to be completely accurate, at this point? I mean, certain things, like you can't get away with like, hey, we're not going to give a certain weapon system and then that certain weapon system is used. I recognize that. But we seem to be telegraphing the first 2 years of this war, we're telegraphing every single contribution down to the like penny.
Yeah.
With descriptions. And it's like, almost like getting credit for helping. It's like you want to get public credit for this thing, so we're just going to keep on showing it. But right. It doesn't serve our needs. That doesn't serve Ukraine's needs. That certainly allows Putin to know exactly what's coming.
Right.
So I think Jack, your question is we probably need a clear covert action program, with the end state being Russia's defeat in Ukraine, complete defeat in Ukraine. And then we have to go work backwards from that and say, okay, what does that take? And which parts need to stay within the covert action, and which other parts are whole of government? Because we already have an ongoing set of whole of government activities. And then you need this sort of like addendum inside it, doing certain things. And that can happen. That can happen. It could happen in a new administration.
Does that require the defeat of Putin's regime? I mean, does that have to be part of the program?
I don't think so. Even if they, if what do you think about this? I mean, if let's say, the the administration, the Biden administration finishes up, and it's a Harris administration, and it's largely the same people in the policymaker decisions, and it's sort of a continuation of what we're doing. Now, I don't see an easy scenario where at some point Russia backs out of occupied territories, but what's going to be diminished on them in terms of their personnel and material, and what kind of effects is that going to have on their economy if we're like another 2 or 3 years into this? That would be a place of pretty significant devastation for Russia. Is there a way we can accelerate that? What were the elements that get us to that point so we're not waiting 3 years? Right? And then start working back from that.
Do you see that as being primarily covert actions, sabotage, espionage, information operations?
Yeah. I mean, it's a lot of covert action. I think we need to go after, I think we really, really need to go after their information operations architecture far, far more aggressively. I think they are punching, that phrase, they're punching way above their weight in this space, and they dominate narrative so much. I mean, on so many issues in our country, that, and on the global stage, they take full advantage of our freedoms and just jam us with it.
Even though they're looking like huge assholes right now.
Yeah.
So, just following along with your career here in all this, I mean, I know we're jumping around, but you spent some time with Special Activities?
I'll tell you. So yeah, Special Activities Center, many of my tours, I've had the pleasure of working with Special Activities officers. In my experience, in the DO, Director of Operations, they are very consistently among the best of us, the best officers I've worked with, the most capable officers I've worked with. They are the closest thing we have to an OSS in the current ranks. I'm lucky to have served with them everywhere I have. I'm always blown away at what their capability is. When I was in one of my tours, when I was a base chief in Afghanistan, Director Panetta came through, and he was on his first trip ever as director. And he came through the base, and one of my officers asked him, what has surprised you so far about the organization? Like, what did you not expect? And the director said that we can do anything globally in-house. And a lot of that's like SAC, it's like sort of the ability to do, land, air, maritime, tech, you name it, medical, like it's just all there. And we can be somewhere, we can get in somewhere, we can operate somewhere, we can communicate from that somewhere. Like like I said, I'll just say it, they're among the very best of us, without question.
So now we're getting to about 2023. You spent some time in headquarters. Do you want to wind us down towards like the tail end of your career, and or I should say the tail end of your CIA career?
Yeah. So I finished up in Ukraine in late December of 2022. So I'm in headquarters, and I'm trying to figure out when I'm going to retire. And I wasn't, I didn't really have a specific plan on when would be ideal. A lot of people do it towards the end of the year, and I'm like, ooh, it's January, February. Now I'm like, maybe do I want to do it at the end of the year or what? So I kind of was dragging my feet and thinking about it, and talking with people, and just trying to gather information. And while I was doing so, another longtime friend and colleague came up to me and was like, "Hey, I got a position I need to fill, and I really would love to have you in it." And I was like, "Oh, like I said before, like the answer is always yes. Like it's very rare that you say no to somebody. Like to me, it's like this is what service is about." I was like, man, I don't know that I can do it. I certainly can't do it. I told him, I'm planning on retiring. I just don't know when. I can't do a 2-year assignment. And he's like, well, just do 1 year. And I really didn't feel like I could even do that. So I said yes to 6 months, right? Which is not convenient for the way we do business, because a lot, at minimum, if you're on like 1 year cycles, it makes things easier for how we advertise positions internally and fill them. But I said I'll do 6 months because I was kind of like trying to be clear with myself. I am going to retire, and I picked a set date, and it was 6 months out. And I stuck with it, which was great. So it was a great experience. This other position, it was in our counter narcotics center. Learning some issues and a part of the world that I don't have experience in, but at the same time, you're still looking at networks. You're targeting networks, and that's something that I've done, my whole career.
By
So just
chance,
looking
was
at
that part of the world, Central and South America?
yes, the Western Hemisphere, as it were.
Shocking.
Yeah, so really interesting set of experiences for me. I did a little bit of travel, some places I'd never been before, which was super exciting. One was for like a conference, so very obscure location that was awesome. And then, south of the border, Mexico. But yeah, really interesting, and get an up close look at the fentanyl problem, which is really just an ungodly tragedy when you look at 300 overdose deaths a day nationwide, 108,000 a year, something like that. So it's just these ridiculous, my math might be wrong, but it was like just crazy numbers. And just cheap, easy to do stuff that can be done inside a kitchen in your home, like really hard to find when you're looking at sort of network attack. Like, all right, how do we find this stuff? Whack-a-mole at the border, supply chain issues on the front end, whack-a-mole on the back end, and in the middle is, like I said, it could be somebody's kitchen. So it's like really, really hard work to try to track this stuff down. And like fentanyl doesn't like emanate anything that would help you, to say, oh, let's look for
Track it.
some kind of, signatures, and but really just an awful, awful issue, and just it touches so many people in such a bad way.
So you retire from the agency. Tell us a little bit about your post-governmental service life. I mean, what has it been like? I know you've been back to Ukraine.
Yep.
You're involved in some other projects and even nonprofit research. Tell us about where
Yep.
you're at now.
Great. Yeah, so after I left, working with a group of friends that include former agency officers, but not just, who are doing a lot of stuff in the business intelligence space. You name the due diligence, research, whatnot. But they have some contracts back with government that they're doing. So I'm helping them with a project with SOCOM that is it's pretty fun. It's effectively a targeting project. It has implications against all of our sort of great power peers, because effectively it's a supply chain challenge, and it touches all the bad countries, and so really looking at ways to characterize and propose ways to better intervene, interdict. The action arms are elsewhere, but this is all just sort of a open source scrub of a certain problem set, and that's been really rewarding. And I like to say that it's an easy transition because one, it like completely rhymes with things I've done before, and two, I'm working with great people on something that's still mission oriented, where I have an opportunity to still learn a lot every day. So that's been fun. And then separately, I'm starting a nonprofit. In the process, I've filed with the IRS for 501c3 status. This is going to be an academic and research institute that is sort of bringing back my philosophical interests, my law background, and even my experience sort of working the globe, to look at, it's a very niche issue. It's looking at how executive emergency powers are basically weaponized by wannabe autocrats to extend their power. And there's a lot of really interesting scholarship already written on this issue. The the legalism is called state of exception. So it's really about states of exception. And in fact, what I'm calling it is the Institute for the Study of States of Exception. And it'll be a central repository for scholarship on this issue. And like I said, there's a lot of good scholarship already. There's scholars in Turkey who write about some things that Erdogan has done, or there's people writing on Orban or Ortega in Nicaragua, like you name it. There's plenty of examples globally of how emergency powers can be used and abused, and I want to sort of centralize it in one place and talk about it.
And you've also been back to Ukraine a few times.
I've been back once, almost twice. I had to bail on the second time, but the first time I went back for a conference with the Cipher Brief, and that was really well done. Tremendous conference. Saw some old friends. There was a few of us formers on the trip. Several of them were on some of the panels, which was great. For me, it was kind of looking at some of the people who are even doing like business there, like some of the drone companies, and there's a lot of, as you know, I mean, it's very well documented. There's an enormous amount of innovation taking place by necessity there. So meeting some of the companies that do that and thinking about, is there other ways to contribute? I also spent a little bit of time so that was in Kyiv. I spent a little bit of time in Lviv, and randomly ran into a friend who I worked with in Afghanistan in 2003. It's just so crazy to run into him there, but he has another nonprofit, and he's like going out to the front line and helping people with learning how to do tourniquets in a foxhole, so to speak, and like pull people out and all this stuff. I mean, it's really just God's work, and it was really amazing to run into him randomly after not seeing him for 20 years.
So, Ed, what's the next step for you? I mean, you've talked about some of these projects that you have going on, and I appreciate you sharing, I mean, your life experience with us. I know it's really about 10% of your career, but I appreciate you sharing those insights with us nonetheless. What do you see? Where are you going from here?
Well, I'm excited about the nonprofit, and I think that's going to take a lot of my time if I do it right. So I want to make sure I'm not taking on too many other things. So I've got a couple of advisory gigs going on right now that I'm really excited about. But I don't want to bite off more than I can chew, so I don't serve them. I want to make sure I serve them well and serve my other interests well. So, long term, I want to write. I've got a lot to sort of unpack and stories to tell. I think there's some really interesting things. I feel like this. I mean, any one of the topics we discussed, we could probably dig deep in for like an hour and a half, I think. And there's at least 10 that came up today, and I love that. And I sort of want to like do that, and like really start writing it down and thinking about it. Obviously, you have to get it all cleared. But that to me is kind of what my future holds. I like, I'm going to continue traveling. I enjoy it. We talked before, I like to snowboard. So I use that as a hook for a lot of travel. And, the work I'm doing right now, all the things that I'm doing can be done while I'm traveling. And I've already been doing them while I've been traveling since I retired. So that's been a nice discovery for me, is that I should continue to spend my time on things that I can be mobile for.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm. And where can people find you if they're interested in retaining your services or just following along with these adventures?
That's a great question. So I'm on LinkedIn in true name, obviously. So I would say hit me up on LinkedIn, because I don't have a website yet. So I'll have to get that set up, and I'll link it to the LinkedIn site. But Ed Bogan, Bogan. Hit me up on LinkedIn.
Awesome. Anything else, guys?
Do we have a couple user questions.
Fantastic.
We have a couple Patreon also.
Okay. User questions. Carlton Percy, thank you very much for the donation. M. Corbin, thank you very much. T-shirt time. I get he likes your T-shirt, Jack. JP Ortega, thank you very much. Curious to see what CIA folks think about soft vet pods and pro-Russia American politicos disparaging and vilifying the CIA and all their hard work?
You know, it's a free country. It's abrasive to me, but it's like I changed the channel. I don't want to. What I so here, right? This is a really good question. I am look, the work that I've done, and I'm no different from all of my colleagues. Like it's an incredible amount of stress we've put ourselves under for a very long time, and we've normalized a lot of it. I'm very focused on removing that stress going forward. I'm very focused on, like I'm on Twitter, and it's a terrible place. But what I do, on the side, on the side that's the group that I cultivated, if I see something that makes me really, really angry or something that makes me really, really happy, and it's like Schadenfreude, I tend to delete the account I'm following because I don't want that in my life. And oddly enough, since I retired, I don't think I've been really stressed or really angry at all, and I'm really happy about that. So the answer to the question is, I don't like that stuff's happening, but I also like there's no shortage of it, so I try to just ignore it.
Yeah.
And just effectively change the channel.
Yeah. KX, thank you very much. How much training did the KGB give to Dr. Ayman al-Zawahiri prior to 9/11?
Ooh, that I don't know. That's a great question, and I probably knew it in 2002, 2003. To what extent that there was anything there, I don't recall. I'm sorry, I really don't recall.
Bjorn, thank you very much. How often do you see case officers become PMOOs? In theory, could a case officer with a prior SWAT or federal tactical experience transfer into SAC?
Transferring in, I didn't see that a whole lot. People would start in. I can't think of an instance that I'm aware of where someone transferred in from, like, saying being just sort of a case officer. Now, to be fair, there are other departments, now inside SAC. Well, there always were other departments, but like there's other departments that aren't just people with special forces pedigree, whether it's like, covert influence type backgrounds and things like that.
So Bjorn is asking another question. What was your impression of Ground Ranch? And if you don't have any idea of what that is, then I'll just say, what's your impression of of SAC?
Yeah, I mean, the Ground Branch, and SAC. I mean, this is, as I said, it's some of the very best of us that I've ever worked with. I mean, I've in almost a tour. Say again.
I can't.
Say again.
Go. No, I'm sorry. Go ahead.
Sorry. Go ahead.
Yeah. So I mean, it's almost every tour. I've worked with Special Activities Center, and they literally are always at the pointiest end of whatever we're doing, right? Like that is the pointiest end of the spear. It's not just being in the hardest places. It's being able to communicate, being able to build relationships quickly, being able basically to solve very strange problems that come up, really super, super complex problems on the fly, just by whatever is around. I mean, the innovation and creativity that is sort of a norm within SAC is exemplary, and that's why they get thrown into everything that's the hardest things we do, and probably over deployed just because the world is always a mess. It just is.
D, that's it for the Patreon question. Do you have some?
Yeah.
And that's it for the...
Daniel H, thanks guys, big fan of the show. Please ask Ed what his favorite 90s rap lyric is and why.
It's the beginning of Triumph, and it's by the Wu-Tang Clan, and it starts with "I bomb atomically," and then it just goes, and it's pretty wild. Anyway, I will not try to rap that here, but do not try this at home.
Next time you have to rehearse it.
Yeah.
We have a couple more. M. Corbin, what was your worst injury from skateboarding, and how do you feel about the changes in the West's ability to use its legal lexicon since the collapse of the USSR?
Oh my God. That's
Yeah.
worst injuries, I would say, on my skateboard. I broke my arm twice, 6 months apart. And what it did was, so I had I had a full up to my shoulder cast both times. So basically I had it on for like 5, 6 months. I get it off. And then within several weeks, I break the damn thing again in the same spot. And so effectively for about a year, I was off my board. And this was a year when so many of the guys I rode with on the East Coast started turning professional. And as I said earlier, I was not as good as any of them or as good as I thought I might be. So there was no scenario where I was going to turn pro, but that was sort of like a exclamation point that ensured I had the wake up call to say, okay, time to pivot to other things in life. And what was the second half of that question again about the USSR? It was like legal terms and like what have we lost?
Yeah, what have we lost with the legal lexicon with the fall of the USSR? Was that?
Yeah, how do you feel about the changes in the West's ability to use its legal lexicon since the collapse of the USSR?
Wow.
Yeah, I mean, it's different, right? Because it's, that was a sort of an all-in global fight, and that allowed us to have a seat at probably every single table, even ones that we made up, over a period of decades. And that's not the case anymore. But at some point, you got to finish those things. But yeah, I mean, it's problematic. The world is, look, our adversaries right now are so well aligned in their behaviors. The great power countries, all of them, right? They're so well aligned right now, and we need to change our language and figure out. I mean, we need to change our behaviors first of all, but we also need to change our language so that we can get the enduring buy-in we need from the citizens. I mean, that is a challenge because, as I've said repeatedly, like the Russians have outmaneuvered us for over a decade just in the narrative space. And I mean, we're paying in so many places for that. And we're not just us. So it's a huge issue. It's a good question.
What I'm out of curiosity. Oh, was there another one, D? I'm curious because you mentioned how they outmaneuver us and our near peers, and and how they've taken advantage of our system. And was this anything that? Obviously, with a background in philosophy, is something you probably think about, and as a trained lawyer. But in your view, how does the United States, without infringing on our own on freedom of speech, on the First Amendment here in the United States, how do we combat information warfare against these people that are using our laws against us?
Yeah, and I think this gets into a covert action space, and like how do we disincentivize our adversaries from maybe not the adversaries, but from people from like wanting to be part of, bot farms and things like that. I mean, I think there's a couple layers to it, right? There's a technical layer where we don't impinge on freedoms, but there's a way we can figure out which handles are not real, or I don't know. I mean, does it impinge on our freedom of speech to require handles to be attached to a real person? I don't know. That's an open question, right? Like the answer might be yes, it does. Like I can't be like an alias on Twitter and have 5 different handsets and 5 different accounts, and I'm not doing anything bad. Right. I just decide I want to do that. So like maybe that's not, because what I'm suggesting is maybe you can figure out that so for example, in the last I would say that over the last 25 days, almost every single day, an account has started following me that is always a female, cute looking, a name with a bunch of numbers in it. It was created in the spring of 2023, and there are 0 posts.
I think I'm in love with that girl. I think we have something very special.
She's really into you.
I think we have something very special.
So like these are clearly not real people, right? Like they're clearly not real people. But like, is there a way to determine that technically. And the companies themselves can do whatever they want. The First Amendment is about the government. The government can't do stuff, right?
Right.
If the companies decided that they wanted to not have this happen, I mean, they'd have to come up with algorithms and means for determining like the reality behind the account. But like I'm saying, I think this is more taking the fight overseas. I think, bot farms or whatever. I mean, we have to figure out how to disincentivize people from doing this.
Yeah, I know that, not in this space, necessarily in the information warfare space, but in the cybersecurity space, you have people like Andrew Thompson, Imposed Cost, who,
Right.
Is like, look, like we have to look at this as not just like a criminal action sometimes, but as more of a national threat. And how should we respond? How do we impose cost on these bad actors? That's just well, if we can reach out through proxy governments and have them arrest them and and go through this whole rigmarole. I mean, I'm all about putting a javelin inside a ransomware gang.
I am too.
But no, it's interesting. It's a challenge towards our freedoms, I think, in terms of how do we ensure that the First Amendment and everything in this country, and if somebody wants to go on to something like Twitter or X and say what they want to say without worrying about losing their job because it's not politically in at that moment, and use an alias, they should be able to.
Right.
But then all these young ladies that are signing up for you and you luring me into, sending them all my money. Like, how do we avoid that?
Yeah, we got to figure that out because it's because that space is so. There's a lot of great literature on like what it's doing to young minds, that are developing, and how to lonely people and how about it's increasing loneliness and what's coming from that. I mean, the effects are pretty vast. Like to loop it back to fentanyl too. It's like, when you look at, a problem like that and the size of it, you realize.
Let's also not ignore all of this cat content.
Yeah, we got some great cat content going on right there.
Absolutely. I got a couple boys.
Yeah.
There's some jokes in there that some of your people will know on that. That's for another time. But yeah, I mean, with the fentanyl thing too, like, the agency, if it's doing anything, it's obviously not domestic, right? It's going to be outside the country. So it's clearly dealing with the supply side of the problem. There's a huge demand side problem in the US, right? And that's related to this, all the loneliness and like what gets people to, or like, the despair factor. Like, what does that lead to? Like, what is that shit gets exacerbated on the Twitters of the world without question.
Yeah. Yeah, for sure.
And by our adversaries.
Yeah.
That's the challenge.
Well, look, we just went through the whole thing with TikTok. Like, what is the government's rule? What is their right? Are they overextending? Can they say that this app that like farms your entire phone for information is that a foreign government can't own it? They're big questions that are just going to become more and more prevalent.
No, it's exactly right. So again, it's going to be yet another issue where we're going to like react and address it when we're at some ungodly crisis where we have teen suicides at some crazy rate or whatever.
Right.
Ed, thank you so much for this interview, man, and spending this time with us. Any final thoughts before we get going tonight? Anything I failed to cover?
I've got a lot of principles and things like that, but those would take some time to talk through. So I mean,
we can have you on again. There's plenty more to talk about.
I would love that.
Yeah, absolutely, man. So we'll be back on Friday with Mike West. Anything, Dave, D?
Check out the newest Eyes On episode. It's great. We have Mark Polymeropoulos on, friend of the show. And no, that's it.
Okay. All right, guys.
Awesome.
Thanks so much.
That's
we
it.
really
We'll
appreciate
see you
it.
guys on Friday. Take care out there.
Thanks a lot.
Thanks, Ed.
Thanks.
That was awesome.